All right, guys. So what I was saying was good afternoon, everybody. Just for the recording purposes. I see somebody else seem to have come in. Miss Ali, I was asking whether or not you were okay with the presentation schedule. You and Mr. Thomas, Miss Thomas, I think, are scheduled for October 15th, along with Cooper and Espinoza. You four guys will be the first set of presentations next week, October the 15th. How are you all going in terms of preparations for that thus far? Can't panic too much, right? So my intention would be to um, broadcast, to hand over to hand over control of the thing to allow you all to broadcast and stuff like that. So we may need, some time to get accustomed to that whole environment as well. All right. Anybody has any questions with the relatively new schedule now? It just kind of pushes everything down a week. That's basically it. Any questions, anybody?
So I have a question, but it's not about the schedule.
What is the question about? That's Miss Mirage.
Huh?
Who's speaking there?
Monica, tell her Monica.
Monica. All right.
Yeah. Someone just asked about a quiz.
Yeah, that's one different class.
Because I was completely scared. I didn't see anything.
You're panicking. No, you'd have known up front if there were quizzes. No.
Right,
She's in an econ class with me. So that's why she was asking about that.
thank you.
Uh, no, don't panic just yet.
Good. Hey boy. Yeah boy.
uh, no, it happens. I can understand her concern though, because if you just join a class and start to hear about we have a quiz deadline and kind of like where the hell that come from? I can understand. I can appreciate that. That's a good question, Miss Monica. All right. Okay, so I just updated. I think I saw Miss Mirage just arrive. Maharaj, sorry.
Yes,
Diana.
good evening.
Hi, good afternoon. Just updating the register here. As I said, what I'll try to do is to take the new schedule and post it in the WhatsApp chat, so you all might be able to just save it to your phone, and that way you'd know what's going on. Miss Espinoza is back again. All right.
Yes,
Okay.
I got booted out.
You got booted out?
Yeah, I just got, I don't know.
You got booted out. I don't think I booted out anybody.
No, sometimes if the Wi-Fi drops or something, that could happen, I
Oh,
think.
you get dropped off. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
that can happen with lag, yes. What area of Trinidad are you in?
Valencia.
Oh, yeah. I'm broadcasting from Valencia as well. So
Oh.
that happens, yes.
Yeah, it does.
So you can have some issues with that. So next week, what will start to happen is that I will start to hand over control to whoever is one of the individuals presenting, who will take control of the screen, and they would start doing their broadcasts and stuff like that from that. So you all will kind of take charge of the platform, and I will take notes on my end to mark your assignments, because I did say to you that I'm going to be marking the assessing your presentations immediately and giving you feedback at the end of the class, so that you would know where you stand. So the way it will work is that I'll keep the classroom open, but chat with each group individually. So one group would have to leave and then come back in, that kind of stuff. So you see how that works out. All right. So I know, hopefully, all right, Jada St. John is trying to get in. Just adding Miss Jada. Hi, Miss St. John. Hi, Miss St. John.
Hi, sir.
All right, welcome. Did Sullivan at all turn up just yet? No. All right, so I know we I submitted to you guys a fairly long PowerPoint presentation to go through. How many of you are able to get part way through at
Hmm.
least?
Hmm.
It was
So,
really,
right. Yeah,
yeah, it
that
was
was
really
long.
long. I know it was long. But again, the nice thing about these presentations is that you don't have to memorize anything. But the intention was to distill out of the chapter probably the most salient things in a logical manner to try and get you all to come to grips with the approach of the model. All right, Ariana Narayan Singh. Hello, Miss Narayan Singh. Hi, Miss Narayan Singh. Oh boy. All right, she's joining from outside. Mr. Narayan Singh,
Hi,
can you?
hello.
Hi, can you
Can you
broadcast?
hear me?
Yeah, just it's kind of low, but we can manage with that.
Okay.
You're broadcasting. Sorry, you're joining us with a different profile than your class profile, right?
I believe, yeah, I joined my Google.
All right. With your personal email.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's okay. I
I'm fine,
mean,
I'm fine.
that's okay. Yeah. I mean, as long as you don't have anything to, as long as we can see who you are, I think that should be good enough for now.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, but the ideal thing is to use your school profile to jump
If,
in.
yeah, I could change it for next round, so I could change it in.
That's no problem. That's not a problem.
Okay.
And we could work with that. So we were talking about, and I'm recording at this point in time, Mr. Ransom, just for your information. We were chatting about the presentation of the chapters that were fairly
Mm-hmm.
long and quite detailed. And the objective today is sort of kind of go through them a little bit together. Um,
Okay.
um, we did chapter one in the first session, I think, yes.
Yeah,
That was chapter
I
one,
thought
and
you recorded.
right, the recording. Sorry, my bad. Because that thing was so long, I didn't want to do a recording about it because that's why I set it up in such a way that the the presentation kind of flows one to the next, but it didn't need a narrative aspect to it, or else the file would have gotten huge, much larger than it already is. But today's session we'll sort of go through chapter two and three, sorry, to see where we can go. So this is three, this is
So I
two.
have a question.
Yes.
So I haven't looked at I looked at the slides, but I got the impression that it was the exact same thing from the book. So I was
Yeah.
reading the book.
You can
Okay, is
do
that
both.
okay?
You can do the
Okay.
both, right? By the way, those texts, those chapters are available on the on YouTube as audio channels.
Oh,
Right?
nice.
Yeah, yeah. You can actually go to YouTube and look for exploring leadership, and
Nice.
they have it set up as chapters. So you could sit down and like when you're driving or something like that, if you download it or rip the file, or for that matter, when you're driving, if you could log in and listen to it, you don't actually have to, because what I found about it, and Mikhail, it's quite all right that you went and you looked at the chapter itself. Um, because the idea is I don't want to move too far away from where the textbook is, for the simple reason that the textbook has a particular format that it wants to present the concepts in, and that's something that we have to pay attention to.
Okay.
Um, because we
Sir?
don't. Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you saying, I think I missed a few seconds. Did you say that there's like an audio version?
Yes, there are audio versions on YouTube of
Mm-hmm.
each chapter, separate chapters.
Okay,
Um,
that would be so much better.
I think it goes up to chapter. I think I saw up to chapter 7 on the thing. Not all the chapters are there, at least from where I can find it. All right, but
Okay.
just look for exploring leadership, and you should see it. The same cover page will come up and that kind of stuff. All right, something for you all to take in as an option. All right, so I said we were going to start looking at chapter 2 a little bit. Anybody else has questions?
Sir.
Yeah.
Well, again, for me, sir, as a mathematics major, these kind of subjects are really sort of outside of my realm, if you want to say that. So you know,
It's outside of your
my, my
learning
realm.
style. Your learning
Yes,
style.
yes. So you were going, I think you were, before you started talking just now, you were saying something about the approach or how to approach it, and you're saying you don't need to memorize everything and that sort of stuff. So if you could just spend a little time going into how you actually approach a course like this, please.
Well, a course like this asks you to really try to interpret and understand a concept. So let me draw parallels. So give me a concept that exists in broader mathematics.
Linear algebra.
Right. So that's an overall concept that is utilized for solutions of different types, correct?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Right. So again, it's about a concept and an idea that has underlying principles. And
Yes.
if you did the sufficient research, it actually has a history
Yeah. Yeah.
of how it emerged to where it did. It's not something that they're going to make you learn, but if you have an idea where it came from and the principles that lie as its foundation,
Right.
then it makes you understand it and its application in the real world much easier. I
Yeah.
suspect that.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is the same approach that you want to utilize with this course.
Okay.
You're not memorizing things, but we're going through things from the that is laying it out in such a manner that is giving you context and background.
Okay.
Um, and that's actually in chapter 1 and the preface, they did an overall introduction into the leadership model and
Yeah.
concept of that they wanted. Chapter 2, this chapter here that we're
Yeah.
about to kind of explore a little bit,
Yeah.
focus its attention on the development of leadership studies over the years. That's chapter 2.
Okay. Yes.
And
Yes.
then chapter 3 outline the entire principle of the relationship model or the
Right.
relational leadership model.
Right.
And I try to go into a little more detail about things. So again, there's no exams to ask you to memorize anything. But what I want you to do is to be able to take these slides or take the text, either one or the audio textbook, if that's better,
Yeah.
and examine where it applies to you, where you see these things in your own life,
Right.
and understand the concept. That makes it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So it's a matter of putting things in context.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
as with leadership is not something that works out of context, it works in context.
Right.
And
Right.
the
Right.
same thing happens when you're learning anything. If you learn anything new, you have to place it in a context of something, or else it doesn't
Yeah.
have any meaning. It
Yeah.
doesn't find a space that you can a foothold in your thinking process.
Right.
Right?
Right. Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it's because why I ask is that well, a lot of what I do comes with repetition and practice, and it gets a bit mechanical. And then there is also the application side of it. But
Good.
when it comes to something like this now, as in exploring leadership as we do now, it kind of plays on my mind a bit in terms of how to switch from this world to this world. Yeah.
Right. But you don't. Because
Yeah.
the approach that the text is using is very similar to the approach that you're talking about.
Right.
Because when we start to look at it, you start to realize that they're asking you to examine the foundations and then put it into practice.
Right. Right.
Look at the application and then put it into practice. That makes sense?
Yes, sir. Yes. Cool.
Right.
Cool. Cool.
It's a logical thing. So as I said before, chapter 2 really tried to look at the context of where leadership came from. And it tried to, well, chapter 2 didn't try, it went through and documented the history of the development of the concept of studying leadership, because leadership wasn't something that we started off as in our development as something that is particularly important. It wasn't really viewed as being something that was critical, though leadership, as you could see in today's environment, is quite important. And you could see here it starts with the concept that leadership was often perceived as a prize. That I am now the leader of some organization, or I'm the leader of this. And fine, you may look at it as being rewarded for something, but then what? That's what the study is asking you to. Then what? So you achieved leadership position in an organization, but what does it mean? How does it change your behavior? What should you be doing? So the last statement here on this slide kind of highlights the same thing that I'm talking about. Leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomenon on earth. This was this gentleman here writing in 1978, and that is critical for us to understand where they're coming from, because it's one of those things that is pervasive in our life. We have to work with the leadership around us at work, at home, in society, internationally. When we look around, leaders have dramatic impacts on our lives. And if we don't pay attention to what they do and how they do things, we can find ourselves getting into serious problems with it. All right. And of course, we can get into a real problem. So this chapter kind of tries to go through as I said, the history of the study of leadership and the concepts that so they talked about the fact that it has been written about and explored recently by lots and lots of people. So like they came across these list of programs. Anybody familiar with any of these programs? I can tell you I'm pretty familiar with this one here. I was actually took part in an official program of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey. He's one approach. I also did another leadership program. I can't remember the name of that one, but it was called the Leadership Challenge. As another text. In fact, it's in the library if anybody wants to read it. That was quite interesting. I did that with a professor out of West Virginia. That was a really interesting study that we did with him. And they're all about developing an understanding of relationship. I don't know if you ever look around on YouTube or on Facebook, you see all these offers coming to you about studying leadership and doing leadership studies to become more effective as a leader. That's those, because it's so critical. You have all of these people and organizations that are trying to teach people how to be good leaders, which is not a bad thing. The problem is that as many programs that exist, it reflects the fact that everybody has a different definition of leadership. And because everybody's defining leadership, there's no one cookie cutter approach to this whole thing. So when we start to look at the relational model, remember that this relational model is another perspective. But the perspective that this model is, we are hoping will appeal to the vast majority of us to want to kind of pattern this behavior. All right. So the question is, everybody appears to have an attitude, or they look at leadership differently. And that difference can be affected by a number of things, in terms of how old you are, what gender you are, what culture you live in, that type of stuff. It would impact upon how you would view leadership. So again, this is why we're going to be looking at the history of leadership and its study throughout the world. So as you could see, today though, we're in a leadership crisis, because we really are surrounded by, I don't know if you all would agree with me, a lot of leaders who really display some of the worst of mankind. I mean, I always think of Donald Trump and his behavior as a leader as being so myopic and so egocentric in his behavior, as opposed to the previous president of the United States, President Obama, who was such a different individual that you'd want to, you wonder where a leader like that comes from. and the reason why we depend so much on our leaders is because we want leaders to help us solve the problems that we have. So if we bring it down to a more micro scale, if we look, we have some serious concerns facing us here in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have to depend upon the government to lead us through it, because those are the people we elected in a democracy as the leaders of our political climate in this particular country. And we have to trust that they will make those decisions that will lead us through safely through this particular situations or issues that we're facing now. We have to really face the COVID-19 situation. I have to say, from a personal standpoint, I think they're doing quite a good job. At least they're not ignoring the science and doing crazy things like, telling you to go and inject bleach and that kind of rubbish. But my point being is that we have some serious issues. I mean, we recently had a budget. How many of you all viewed the budget or have been reading up on the impact of the budget recently? Anybody?
I didn't read it, but I was listening to it.
All right. And what do you
Same.
So I would have read some stuff from it as well.
Good. And I would say that you need to, immerse yourself a little bit into the policies that they're suggesting, because you have to assess what it means to you and how it's going to affect you.
Yes.
All right. Anybody has any see that stuck out to them? Now, I'm an economics teacher, so you could ask economics
For
questions.
me, I would say it was the well, in terms of stood out, I would say the freezing of the filling of vacancies within the public sector.
Yes,
I'm going to
yes.
say that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so why, and I can't see who's speaking, so you'd have to identify yourself based on my screen right now.
Okay, Mikhail Cooper.
All right, so Mr. Cooper, why did that stick out to you?
Well, because the public sector is one of the largest forms of employment, or the largest form of employment within this country. And I think that I don't believe that now is a time to pull back on that. I actually think that now is the time where we need to get some brilliant minds in there and try to educate and incorporate them and use that human resource to get us out of where we are in some
But
way,
But do you really think that they're going to freeze on hiring people? Or is it a freeze
Honestly,
on filling permanent positions?
well, that's the thing. It was so vague that
That's right.
I'm at the point now where I'm saying to myself, you know what, it makes no sense worrying, because you're kind of worried over something that has not been fully fleshed out.
Yep.
And it seems like they're just dancing around that. And everyone who should be, like the stakeholders, the trade unions, everyone seems to be dancing around it and not trying to get those answers for the us, the people.
And one thing I want to suggest, it's Mr. Cooper, right?
Yes.
Are you a member of the public sector? Do you work for the
Sort
No, I
of,
have to
yes.
identify that, right? So you're quasi public sector, right?
Yes.
Something like myself. So one of the trends that has been taking place in the public sector recently is the movement away from nominating people and hiring them to permanent positions, but the movement towards contract labor. Not so?
Yeah, correct.
So do you think that anything's really changed when it comes to placing people in positions? The biggest thing is that they
What do
don't
you
get
mean?
to, well, because most positions in the public sector have been replaced by contract officers rather than permanent officers. So
Yeah.
the change for a while now has been that positions have been filled through contract officers rather than permanently appointing people to positions.
Yeah.
So now the basic thing is going to be it's probably not that they're going to be looking at critical employment positions being left out, but the manner in which they may fill it is through contract employment, which is temporary in nature. And that may be a strat. I'm not saying it's what they're going to do, huh? But it may be a strategy that they're going to look at, especially if the positions are critical to the administrative functioning of a department or a branch of the ministry. Critical people will be brought in, but on a contract basis. What that does is that it reduces the expenditure on the human resource factor, because whenever you hire somebody permanently, you have to begin making contributions or allowances for contributions to a pension system, so that it's not just the payment of the officer, their salary, but also all the other parts that go with it, which is a contribution to a pension plan and so on. And you remember a couple of years ago that the NIS was talking about the fact that the NIS, which is a national insurance and pension scheme, is running into problems for its survival because there's not enough people contributing to the um to the to the base in terms of the number of us paying in as opposed to the amount of money being paid out. So that disparity is creating a problem where the drawdowns are beginning to exceed the payments in, and that leads to a dichotomy, because if there's insufficient funds coming in, you can't fund the payments to the individuals who are drawing down. Which is one of the reasons why they also discuss increasing the retirement age from 60 to 65.
Yeah.
You understand? So you have to look beyond the policy and start to understand the background to it, and try and work out some of the things that may not be fully stated but are implicit in the decision making. Because I think those factors are part of the reasons why they're looking at freezing the hiring of permanent positions and putting people in those posts. I doubt very much that they're going to leave those posts vacant. They may have contract officers covering them, but they wouldn't even give them the title. They'll just give them a contract office thing on consultancy basis. That's primarily what's going to happen there.
Yeah, they're using that term service provider now.
Correct. And they can even hire out. So if it's a big aspect of activity, they can also look at hiring an entire firm to come in and run that operation for them. All right, because one of those things that they talked about is going to be in the area of remember they're trying to bring on the revenue authority, and that revenue authority, the idea was to bring in private sector firms to help run and administer the revenue section of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. That's going to be a tricky thing. But as I said, these are all big issues that we face, and we want our leaders to help lead us through that. But we want them not only to lead us to find solutions, but we want them to lead in such a way that we trust the leadership. That's probably the biggest thing that comes up when we start to look at our leadership in and around us, is how many of us really trust our leaders? That's and trust that they're doing things without personal gain being part of their whole behavioral decision-making process. And that's what this model is going to ask us to look at in more detail. All right, so we understand, therefore, that we need leaders, and we want people to lead us through situations. So, as I said, this chapter is going to be looking at the whole concept of where leadership sits in our psyche. So this statement here about the anti-leadership vaccine is quite interesting, because a lot of people who would make great leaders refuse to take leadership positions because of how society is reacting to leaders in our society. Because far too long we've had leaders who have let us down, and because they've let us down, we start to heap a lot of criticism and scorn on these individuals, because societies have grown very distrustful of the leadership that we have out there. They always question, why are you doing what you're doing? And of course, society is like that. I mean, we have, if we again we go back to our political circumstance here, you have part of the country that absolutely can't stand the PNM, and then you have another part of the country that that can't stand the UNC. So you have groups of people throwing comments at each other and trying to find any little thing to say that this leader is corrupt and that leader is corrupt or these people are corrupt and so on. And that therefore would make somebody who might make a better leader, who has better transparency and better ethical skills and stuff like that, be, you know, cautious about trying to or volunteering to take up leadership positions, because we have this situation where we, I mean, how many of you are willing to go up for political parties and take on of the kind of bacchanal that goes on in our system? How many of you have done that?
Nah, sir, nah,
Yeah.
And that's why.
nah. There's no real
So at this
motivation
point,
to
I
do it,
feel like it's
sir.
not
Nah.
worth it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, that's the whole thing. That's why it's called the anti-leadership vaccine. Because people who would probably make good leaders don't end up taking up those positions. So you end up having a group of people who would rise to the occasion, who are not really leadership material, but they're there because of the vacuum created by the lack of individuals who are qualified or who have the better leadership potential taking up that
Yes.
situation.
Yes. I see it in work, sir. Yes. Yes.
You
Yes.
understand?
Yes. Very true. Yes.
All right. So
So I have
that's,
a question.
yes. Go ahead.
So, do you think it's safe to say that one of the reasons why it's hard for someone who wants to present themselves, because we've seen it, we see it every 5 years for elections,
Yeah.
someone who wants to present themselves as a new leader, a breath of fresh air for the population. Do you think that because we have encountered what we would deem, most of us on whatever side we may hold, deem
Mhm.
as poor leadership, with things like mismanagement, etc. Um, that has created a sense of, like, the people are cynical, and skeptical of any
That's
new faces, that
we,
that it gets to the point where they say, you know what, we're not even gonna, yes, we are dissatisfied with what we have, but we're not even gonna try anybody new, because we rather stick with the lesser, the two evils between what we've been accustomed to for all this time.
yes, the argument is stay with the what is it? The evil you know rather than the evil you don't. Or the monster you know as opposed to the monster you don't.
Yep.
Uh, that mentality, unfortunately, is the same sort of anti-leadership type of activity, because I noticed that there was a number of smaller parties that rose in our last election, and I listened and I tried to listen to them as much as possible, and I thought there were some people who came up with some really good ideas, but the political system, the way it's designed and set up, really works towards this monolithic structure that we have, where you have established parties holding sway over everybody, and anybody else who comes up is like a voice in the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that situation doesn't lend itself to us having an option for viable options to come up, because there were a number of other parties. Like, I remember the looking at the MSJ, for example, which came out of the labor union movement, which incidentally is where the UNC came from. The UNC came from the labor background. Um, Having really good options in terms of the individuals, but whether or not they'll get the support from within society, that is where the problem is going to come up. And that's because we have been entrenched into thinking about leadership in a particular way. And that entrenched methodology that exists, and I might be blatantly thing, we are very tribal. And the tribal thinking has been is in fact related to our ethnic backgrounds, and as a result of that, it's very difficult for a third or fourth party to come in and provide a viable option for us to look at it. And this system that we have of first past the post, sorry, excuse me, first past the post system of elections, where only the person who's at the lead wins the position. It then ignores the group of individuals who voted for somebody who was different. Um, if we were to look at the votes that these smaller new parties garnered, what happens to the people who really wanted that type of leadership? So therein is an idea for proportional representation instead. But again, that's not something that can easily happen. And it's not something that a lot of people might understand clearly, because there are large parts of the population in any country that uses a democratic system that feels underrepresented by the powers that are in place, and you can actually see it behaving that way. I mean, I have seen parts of the country ignored by administration after administration, because they didn't vote for you, kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know if you all are familiar with that behavior by some political parties in the past, but that overt ignoring of people, it's horrible. But again, um, it has to do with our attitude towards leadership and how leadership comes about. So something for you to think about. All right, so let's move forward a little bit here. So this is the changing leadership paradigm that we're dealing with. We know that a lot of people don't want to get involved with leadership and stuff like that. So um, we're going to be looking at the research that was conducted, and you all could go through this, because as I said, it stays very close to what the text has done. And in the research, they identified a fair number of myths that exist about leaderships. So leaders are born, not made. That's one myth. Leadership is hierarchical, and you need to hold a formal position, have status and power to be considered a leader. You need to have charisma to be a leader. So these are some of the myths that were identified from the research that was conducted about leadership. Then you have there's one way to lead, and it's impossible to be a manager and a leader at the same time. And then leadership is about common sense to be an effective leader. That's not necessarily the case, but we'll see that in a bit. So the research started to show us different things about the truths about leadership. And one of the first ones that they broke down was that leaders are made, not born. Hence the program that we're doing. Leadership cannot be a trait that only exists through genetics, because if that were the case, then we would only have leaders coming from particular families, and that is not true. So many people, what the theory is that, or the idea is that, concept really is that many people have the capacity to lead, but because we don't fit into the traditional leadership models that exist outside there, we leave that. That's not business. That big people think. That kind of talk is behind that kind of stuff, right? So we want to dismiss this concept that leaders are born. Leadership is something, and leaders can be made. And one of the things that impacts upon people's ability to lead is the people who grow up in environments that help them to develop skills and become leaders in themselves. Because some of the best leaders didn't start off in rich families and leadership firms or traditional. A lot of these stories that we see on television about leadership speaks to people who were born, like for instance, not Mahatma Gandhi so much as it is, oh my God, why can't I remember his name? I'm seeing his face right now. Somebody help me. The first black president of South Africa was
Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela. Yeah.
Mandela.
He wasn't traditionally set up as a leader. You understand what I'm talking about? Why did that name just escape
Nah,
me?
man, sir. Nah, man, sir.
The senior movement, senior movement. Right? But these are leaders who stepped against the norm of their own societies. You follow what I'm talking about? Because in
Yeah.
their societies, Nelson Mandela needed to be a tribal leader. You understand? To be considered a leader to begin with, but he just rose above all of that and moved into a situation where he, through social movement and social change, he became a leader that represented a movement that the people of South Africa believed in, and helped that transition out of apartheid. And he was the first black prime president of South Africa. Those are people who buck against the thing, and had a lot to do with his environmental influences and stuff like that. Because remember we talked about how long he was in jail and the kind of oppression that he dealt with and rising to the oppression. If you ever really want to look at a film that tried to depict some aspects of his leadership potential, there's a film called Invictus, where Morgan Freeman played the role of Nelson Mandela. And it was primarily about rugby. But I mean, have a look at it if you want. It's quite enjoyable, but there was some really tight scenes in there that really tried to explain the leadership motivation of each one of the individuals, key characters in the film, who they were trying to represent. Quite interesting. Take a look at that. You can. All right. So leadership occurs at all levels of an organization. Now, so this is something that's some you see happening in organizations. The expectation is that the only persons who have leadership responsibilities and rights are those individuals who are the head of an organization. But really, and truly, if you think about organizations and the way they work, if you don't have leadership in different aspects of the organization, the organization will not work. And most progressive organizations have been trying to flatten out that hierarchical system to allow for individuals at different levels of the organization to take up leadership roles. Because basically, once we have one unified objective throughout an organization, and it could be top down or horizontal, it doesn't matter. Once everybody who's taking up leadership positions holds to the same vision and mission, then you're going to get better compliance throughout the organization towards meeting those objectives. So the more people who take on that leadership position or take on leadership responsibilities, the better the organization can work. Now think about that from a societal point of view. So if we all agree with the direction that a government is positioning for a country, and we have multiple people throughout our society all trying to help support that goal, then think about how much more effective it would be to get your organization or to get the country to operate towards it. Let's think about the goals that we have here in relation to COVID-19. The leadership has outlined a particular position, and how do we get people to comply with the guidelines that we talk about? And that has to do with people in society becoming self-motivated to lead others to do the right thing. So what do you do when you're walking on the road and somebody's not wearing a mask? Do you
Make them
tell
out.
them, you what?
You make them out.
You make them out?
Yeah.
Right. So that is a system of where we're using public shaming as a method of enforcing a particular behavior.
Yes.
But think about where maybe that person doesn't really understand this whole thing about the mask. You might make them out, yes, but did we really need to get to the point where we punish people to be able to get them to follow a rule? And that's the problem that we ended up with in our society. People don't do things unless there's some punishment or negative reinforcement.
Yeah.
Remember we talked about that at the beginning of the thing. How do we get people to self-motivate towards making positive change? That's the purpose of this course. We want to motivate you guys to make changes in life. So understand leadership occurring all through organizations is
Yeah. Yeah.
where we want to get. So the man on the street on the corner, he's potentially a leader, or can exhibit leadership potential through sharing of ideas and not beating people over the head to get them to do the things you want to do, but to be able to elicit a response through instruction and through cooperation and through adherence to the rules that we know are safe for everybody. All right, so this is where leadership occurring all through an organization. Now, you'd find that a lot of the text is going to look at leadership in organizations, but we have to transcend that and look at leadership in our society and in the world and see similar aspects of behavior taking place from a broader perspective. That's going to be really important to look at. All
So,
right, so yes,
okay, so
yes.
Mikhail here again. Um,
Mhm.
so I was wondering, because I've noticed that throughout the book, there's a particular term, well, in chapters that I've looked at thus far, there seems to be a particular term that is the anchor, if I could use
Yes.
that word, which is relational leadership, right?
Hmm. That's the
So,
model.
right,
Chapter
yes,
3 is the model on the
on
relational
that, yeah.
leadership model. In fact,
So
it's
going
coded in
along,
RLM.
going along through the the book and seeing the different explanations that they give for that and the four,
Definition.
sometimes five principles that it's governed by,
Yeah.
um, it makes sense that okay, so we do understand and they touch on that there are different forms of leadership, and when it comes to the relational model, it makes sense to me. Although I've noticed that getting the effects that you want using that model may be a little more time consuming. Like for instance, if we tie it back to the whole mask wearing situation and
Correct. Yeah.
influencing persons to take that responsibility upon to themselves. But looking at it using that example, I'm also seeing that rather than the punishing model, I'm seeing that should we attain our goal using the relational model, the effects may be a lot more long term
Correct. And more sustainable.
and more sustainable. Yeah,
Because when you come next time with another idea or another issue, people trust you. But that's the whole point about this. You have to be positioning yourself as a leader who people trust, and they believe you when you come and you say what you say. And it has to be almost universal trust based upon that. You understand? It's harder, and you're right. The model is not a model for leadership one and done. It's about a model that has to work continuously through the lifespan of any individual. And it does require a lot more work, but the impact of a model like that will be more long lasting. I'm glad you recognize that. But that is something that is critical to the way in which you have to view leadership. It's not just a one and done thing. It's something that pervades our entire life. So that brings us really direct to this next point here about charisma. Um, Charismatic leaders are dangerous leaders in the past because we've seen a few of them in the past having some really bad things. Um, and the one thing that this theory says is that really and truly, you do not need to be charismatic in order to be a leader. You don't have to be. And the reason for that is because charismatic leadership has had some disastrous impacts in the past. I mean, it works both ways, but charisma is not a necessary ingredient to be a good leader. That's what they're trying to. And for every example of a good charismatic individual that existed, there's a negative one that exists. And I think this guy here, you all know Peter Drucker. He's one of those management scientist people. The three most charismatic people in the last century inflicted the most suffering on the human race:
Oh yeah.
Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. Right? Hitler was Germany, Stalin was Russia, and Mao was in China. And what matters, the statement here, what matters is not the leadership's charisma. What matters is the leader's mission. So
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
And that brings us to these four guys, charismatic leaders in history. You all recognize all of them?
Yes, sir.
Three out
Yeah.
of four.
Three out of
Sure.
four. So you don't recognize the Reverend in the corner there?
Correct.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
That is not
Right, so
Jim Jones, sir.
there you go. Somebody who knows. What's Jim Jones known as?
The man who
Guy
made
who,
the people in Guyana drink the Kool-Aid and die because they were about to transcend humanity or some craziness like that.
yeah. And then he tell them that the world was ending so that they could
Yeah.
and that
How many
they should just
people?
die.
I can't remember how many.
It
Oh gosh.
wasn't it like 100? I
It
can't
was
remember how
something in
much
the
it was.
hundreds, I believe. But I
It
can't
was
remember
in
the
the
exact figure.
hundreds.
Was his entire flock. Yeah.
It was a lot of
There
people though.
was a lot of people all at once who
That's
all
right.
voluntarily consumed Kool-Aid laced with cyanide,
Mm-hmm.
including entire families.
Yeah.
Uh,
Were they
parents.
aware of it?
Wow.
Yes, yes. That is the
Okay.
power of charisma. I mean,
Yes.
all four of these individuals here had great charisma when as leaders. I mean, you would recognize Hitler from his very predominant mustache type of situation, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. But I added Jim Jones because he's not well known as a charismatic leader, especially in the modern sense. Obama,
Excuse sir.
yes,
I don't mean to cut you, but like I remember when I was in high school and I was doing religious education, right?
uh-huh.
So the definition of a good cult leader,
Hmm.
charisma was like
Yes,
was
Yeah.
the top thing in the definition. Like they say
requirement
you
for them.
must be charismatic to be a cult leader. So I
Yes,
always
because
remember
you
that.
what you're making them do is if I go back here a little bit, you'd see that charismatic leaders have a profound and unusual effect on followers. They are seen most times as visionaries who have strong desires for power and they can easily motivate others. That is the power of being charismatic. When they say profound, I mean the phrase profound and unusual effect. That's the scary part. They can make people do things that they don't want to do. That's necessary. And basically, if we look at these two gentlemen on this side here, they were able to influence groups of individuals, more people by Hitler than Jim Jones, because Jim Jones was
Yeah.
a couple hundred, couple maybe
Yeah.
about a or so. But these three individuals were able to influence thousands, if not millions, of people into making different decisions about their lives and behaviors. And that is the danger of charismatic leadership. And as much as people will talk about being a leader means being charismatic, it doesn't mean that it is a good thing. And that's the one thing that the model says. You don't need to you don't need to be charismatic to be a good leader. That's the thing that they're saying. All right. So that's quite true. All right. So another truth about leadership is that there's not one right way to lead, and that makes sense because different people, different styles, different techniques, and no technique may be more effective than another, but it may be effective in terms of the individual and their ability to do it. That's primarily the thing that we want to look at. All right. So another truth, the importance of distinguishing between management and leadership. And this is one of the things, remember they talk, you can't be a leader and you can't be a manager at the same time.
Right.
That's not, you can be both, right? There's a dichotomy between the two though, because management is focused on the directives of the company, whereas leadership might be broader in that perception. Okay. But in order to be a good manager, you ought to be a good leader. That's the basic thing that comes to mind when it says that. You could be a good manager, but not a good leader, right? So they're not mutually exclusive. But the better thing would be that you can be a good manager and a good leader, because I think that might lead to better management overall. All right, and that's one of the things that traditional beliefs so that managers aren't leaders. but you can have an overlap in the two. I am firmly in belief of that. All right. So remember, as I said, managers are closely bound to the organization, whereas leaders may not have any organization at all. That's quite true. A lot of leaders are more social. They're not institutional. All right. But again, one of the aspects that we're going to look at about leadership is leadership in context. All right. Managers are preoccupied with doing things the right way, whereas leaders are focused on doing the right thing. That's a huge distinction. That's a huge distinction in the motivation of somebody's behavior. It's not about for managers. Remember, you like take for example a manager in an accounting department. They're going to focus on the process in which how you go about doing something. Make sure you do this the right way. Why? Because if you use the same technique correctly, you're likely to get the correct response. Now, that for example might appeal to our mathematics student because getting something down to a scientific process helps to ensure that you have the same result every time,
Yes. Yes.
right? But a leader, on the other hand, leading people, is not going to focus on how it's going to be done, but he's going to focus on what has to be done. The focus is on doing the right thing, not the right way, but doing the right thing.
Yeah.
There's a distinction there that is critical in terms of governing how we go about doing what we have to do. All right, and that's a truth about leadership that was exposed during the research. So they go on to talk a little more about that whole differentiation process between management and leadership, because most of the studies that I saw outside there focus their attention really on organizational leadership within the management of firms and corporations. And that's because they've spent a lot more money researching leadership in those models or in those structures, and therefore its application to business can be readily seen. But leadership itself speaks to a wider ambit of individuals or a wider ambit of activities in human life. So those are things you want to pay attention to. One big truth is that leadership is teachable. We would not have this course if leadership wasn't teachable. All right.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to say that you have to be born with these things. That makes no sense at all. So, in terms of defining leadership, one of the things that I found interesting was that prior to the 1900s, leadership wasn't really something that was clearly defined. You just had people who were leaders, and and in terms of defining what is leadership, that again brings us to the situation that leadership is different to everybody based upon your experience with it. So from the 1900s to 1929 or so, there were very few definitions of formal leadership. And then we had the 1980s, there's an explosion of discourse about leadership, leading to all sorts of definitions. So in the 1980s, you had 110 definitions, and then you had 221 definitions found in books and other stuff. Then you have 3,300. There are thousands of definitions that exist in today's society. An early definition by Mumford, see the saying, defined leadership as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control and societal phenomena. That's an interesting, definition. Is it a leader as a controller, sort of like a master of puppets kind of thing? That's a very cynical way to look at leadership, that leaders control people. And that when I read this Mumford definition, I already thought about the master of puppets sort of scenario. Okay, so that was quite interesting. So more and more work was done, and eventually we started to get better and better definitions of the leadership that existed. Contemporary definitions that start to link goals, relational process, which is where we are looking at moving into. And then, of course, you had the contribution from from the fields. We talked about this in the first chapter, but from anthropology, psychology, history, and sociology, the arts and philosophy. Those things contributing to the nature of leadership coming from different aspects and spheres of life. Because you can be a leader in different circumstances and contexts, and that was not something that was really pulled upon when we were trying to tease together, when the research was going on for determining definitions of what is leadership. We Today we know there is not one correct definition of leadership. This causes us to return to the question: what is the purpose of leadership? And you have to use that question to decide the definition that you're going to use. Is that it's going to vary based upon the pick that up. Hold a second, guys. Hello. Hi. All right, hold on a second. All right, guys, just give me a chance. Let me just hand this call off to somebody. Mom. All right, guys, sorry about that. To locate some people. All right, anybody has any questions coming out of these? The fact that we can't really have one definition. Anybody commenting on that? Just make sure everybody's here still. Yes, 22. All right. Let's pick back up from where we are. All right. Okay, so we need to move with a little more intention here. All right, so metaphorical definitions really is to give you a point of comparison. So you're comparing to try and put them into context with each other, so with something else. So you have various metaphors that allow for it, but the one that point that, and you all could read about them, but the one that I liked was really the one that this Dupree guy talked about with the jazz musicians. He looked at this metaphor of leadership being like a jazz band leader. Well, for me, it appeals because I play music a little bit. The band leader must choose music, find the right musicians, perform, and then in public, obviously. But the effect of the performance depends on so many things: the environment you're performing in. You can think about the sound system, the audience, that kind of stuff. The volunteers playing in your band, the need for everybody to be able to perform proficiently as an individual, but also proficiently as an individual within the group, and the fact that everybody is dependent upon each other to be able to perform well. So as I said, this is a great analogy or metaphor for defining what leadership is, because if you think about for anybody in class here is a musician, plays an instrument, that kind of stuff. Nobody. There are no
No,
musicians.
my dad is a musician. I used
Yeah,
to play violin a little bit, but haven't it in a while. But my
maybe
dad
some.
is a big musician.
Yeah, when you say
Uh-huh.
who's this speaking?
Well, Eden Espinosa, when I say big, as in he used to play for Blue Ventures, Taxi, Traffic,
Right,
a few
I
other
might know
carnival
him
bands.
actually.
His, it will prob a lot of people know him, especially when they see him. His name
What
is
is most people in that field had a sobriquet. What was it? What was the sobriquet?
what you mean by that? Sorry.
A nickname. Not they wouldn't go by
I
their
don't know. A lot of people tend to call him short man. Like he's a short Spanish man, but he used to have a ponytail.
uh
So a lot
I,
of people used to call him short
sound,
man. Or
sound
but
familiar already.
yeah, but I probably if you see a picture of him, you might know him because a lot of people know him.
All
Yeah,
right.
because
And if you play
he used to play for all those big
what
carnival
is
bands back in the day.
what instrument you played?
Guitar. He was always the lead guitarist.
All right, cool. That sounds
His
good.
last band was the A Team. The A Team is still the band's still around, but he doesn't play anymore. He's
Okay.
he's retired.
Well, he's not retired. He's just resting a
Well,
little. Trust
yeah.
me.
Well, he does. He has another business now. Like he builds swimming pools now, so he focusing on that
Yeah, well, I
and
mean,
not the musician
unfortunately,
aspect.
music is not something that makes a lot of money in.
He was also a big paranderos too. Like he still does that. So
Well, that was more seasonal. So yeah, I could see
yeah,
him doing that. 'Cause if he does guitar work, he will do guitar work in many different fields. But understand,
yeah,
so maybe you might appreciate this if you've participated in playing music in a band
yeah.
situation.
I love music.
Good. So, but understanding how bands work is where this metaphor lies with. And I found it was interesting simply because I also played in bands and play music. I'm a bass player, and it's critical that you get a group of people. You may not have the best skilled individuals in your group, but if your group works well with each other, the band themselves would shine. Doesn't yes, it matters about the individual skill, but you can always tell when a band um, is performing well as a unit as opposed to a group of individuals, talented individuals playing. There's a huge difference between in that sense. But that's an interesting, as I said, a powerful illustration of the inclusiveness and valuing of individuality because you have to value each individual as well as work within that group. So this metaphor or metaphoric definition is just to give you an idea of what people have used in the past to try and define what leadership is all about. And that gives rise to various types of things. This other definition was interesting as well, is that leadership is an episodial affair. And that was interesting because it's quite true. You don't deal with leadership every day, every second, every minute. It's in small bits and pieces of time where leadership plays a particular role, and then you go back to normal, and then leadership comes back in on or aspects of leadership. So this was also a very interesting metaphor that it's used. It's episodic. That's the phrase they use. That leadership is episodic in nature, um, so that there are moments in your day. So, for example, if you're having a meeting with your leaders, then that's going to be a big period of your time. But the rest of the time at work, you're not really working under the leader. You're doing your work and that kind of stuff. And then you have a different, you know, somebody checks in on you. That's a leadership movement kind of thing like that. Or you check in on somebody depending upon the context of where you're working. So that ebb and flow situation is quite interesting because it doesn't mean that leadership pervades your life in every second, but it is there in your organization and it's there in your life overall, but it's not hovering over you every second of every day. It's not omnipotent. like that. But it has that type of impact, and it has an omnipotent type of impact with people, especially when leadership is not working well. Um, if you think about it at work, if you're working in a situation where your leadership is poor, um, or is divisive in nature, it impacts upon every aspect of your activity in that job because you feel dissatisfied with the overall behavior of the organization or the company, and that then leads you to behaving in a particular manner or particular situation. That is something that you'll probably need to pay attention to. So, all right, so the theories. So this is the part that they spent a lot of the time on the various theories that were generated over the years about leadership. So we start here with the fact that leadership is such a multi-dimensional aspect that having one theory really doesn't cover it all. So let's look at the nature of the theories that came up. Um, the first thing that the context that we have to look at is leadership is not very simple. It's a very what's the word? Complex, as they have a complex social phenomenon, and therefore theories have to be complex in themselves in trying to understand leadership across the board, because it's not a simple thing. So let's look at the different theories that we're going to look at here. You have the great man theory, the trait approach, behavioral approaches, influence theories, reciprocal leadership approach, the chaos theory, and the situational contingency approaches. So these are the theories that we're going to look at. So the great man theory is probably one of the first major set of theories, because it precedes the trait approach. But the great man theory really came out of the thinking of Darwinistic thinking from before. Now, anybody is familiar with the Darwinist approach to leadership, and is there anybody who's familiar with Darwin and his thinking?
So doesn't that have to do with like evolution and genetics? So wouldn't this lend itself to probably being born as a leader? I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Correct. Yes. So the Darwinist approach is about various types of hereditary properties, so that the survival of the fittest, that's the Darwinist theory. So a leader will only survive based upon the fact that he's genetically engineered to do so. Making sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it borrows of that. So the great man approach, which is the first theory that we're looking at here in terms of, is that genetically great men were born to be leaders. So that's the whole thing, and primarily men, not women. So let's start that whole problem there. So if you wanted to be, if you basically the great man theory was that you had to come from a line of great men to be. So this lends itself to monarch and that kind of stuff. If you think about it, the kings and queens of the past, but it would ignore. See here, it ignores things like Joan of Arc and Catherine the Great and other Elizabeth the First and Second and so on. They would ignore women because the theory didn't sit nicely with the fact that first off, leadership was a male-oriented activity. So, and this is where you had this whole nonsense of um, interbreeding in marriages and stuff like that, because in order to make sure that your bloodline stays pure and this kind of stuff, it's a whole weird theory. But it's the great man theory. But that begins the whole process, because it started the myth that leaders are born, not made, right? So
Yeah.
then you have the trait approach. The trait approach really says that people who are good leaders have particular traits. The bad thing about this trait model or trait approach to leadership, so what you're saying that you have to look for these traits that existed naturally in individuals. So they were born with charisma, they were born with good looks, or they born with strength and that kind of stuff. So this trait theory, however, kind of doesn't hold, because you know what? Then they were never able to quantify what those traits were. so that the theory eventually fell apart over time, because that trait theory, yes, it might be true that yes, leaders have some traits that they think so, so they assume leaders have particular traits such as intelligence, height, self-confidence, differentiating themselves from non-leaders. So it's arbitrary traits that they start to ascribe to individuals by looking at leaders and saying, okay, so what makes this person a great leader as opposed to this person? So they'll say your looks, yeah. It was ridiculous. It's sort of like, a cookie cutter approach to leaders. You had to have X, Y, Z. If you don't have X, Y, Z, then you can't be a leader. So that's the nature of this trait model. The next set of models that started to arrive on the scene were behavioral approaches. This is where we started to get the various different types of behavioral sciences to begin to look at the the specific behaviors, not necessarily traits, but behaviors of individuals in successful leadership roles. And behavioral sciences began to make those observations. Psychology, sociology, and those anthropology, those things started to make those types of things. And primarily, a lot of the research was geared towards organizational observations, and they'd be looking at the effectiveness of different leaders and trying to gather the different behavioral things that were taking place, um, that these leaders were exhibiting, and try to quantify it. And of course, this was during the 50s and 60s. So um, the development of the scientific methodology was something that was taking place during this time. This is during some of the revolutionary periods. So you had these two models here, these two studies, the Ohio State and Michigan studies, University of Michigan studies. Um, Again, they came up with these two concepts of consideration and initiating structure. So consideration was the degree to which a leader will act or be considerate of the conditions of their subordinates. That was one behavior that they looked at measuring or observing. So this is basically about you being concerned and considerate about the situation and circumstances and welfare of the people that you were leading. And the second element was the initiating structure, the degree to which leaders define and structure his or her own role and the roles of the subordinates towards the attainment of groups. So you have to have the structure in place and you have that consideration in place to be a good leader. The problem was how much of each did you need? That those two, what they refer to as dimensions, are considered to be independent but interdependent. And they can be positive and negative. You could have a leader who got the job done because they had great initiating structure in place, but they may be poor in terms of having consideration for other people. So again, this behavioral theory started from very simplistic observation of things that they were looking at. Then you had Blake and Morton proposing in this group of theories concern for people and concern for production. Again, it's about consideration of people and then being aware of the fact that you have to be concerned for the output of the company. So again, you'd see the organizational focus of a lot of these studies that they were talking about here. Then you have this other model here coming from the Michigan studies. They identify three types of behaviors, and these should come up a little. Will ring a bell for the group for the team that's doing teams and groups, because these phrases might come up: task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented behavior, and participative leadership. So those three behaviors were something that they identified at looking at the behavior of leaders in the organization. What behaviors were task oriented, what was relational development, and what was the type or style of leadership model that was being utilized, participative leadership. So they looked at that in terms of looking at effective versus ineffective managers and tried to break down these three behaviors and try and measure them. So again, you remember the objective of social science is to try and mitigate against subjective observation, and you try to objectify the observations that you're seeing. So they would probably, have a checkboard and say, okay, every time you did this, it was task oriented, and do a check on that, see how many times you did that through the day, that kind of stuff. So what you're trying to do is to take a social behavior and try to break it down into scientific observation. And that is a tricky behavior. And of course, back in the 50s and 60s, they were just getting on top of the process of making it more scientific in your approach. Of course, the problem with behavioral science or behavioral approaches is that they try to break things down and simplify something that was already very complicated. And that's partially one of the failings of behavioral approaches in the early days, where the behaviors were basically tried to oversimplify very complex things. And of course, the observations being made ended up being rather inconclusive and inconsistent because had there was no consistency in the observations that were being made, and that of course will negate against a theory becoming accepted as rules or law, as with other sciences that hold to those behaviors. Then we have the situational contingency approaches, and that is based upon the whole idea that in the situational thing, here you have a leader who emerges out of a circumstance or situation. This is especially true when you think about social movements, mass movements in particular. Leaders tend to kind of emerge in a situation. So that was one of the approaches that they're looking at there. Contingency theory incorporated the situation and then looked at how that situation affected the behavior of the leader. Um, and the thinking is that you can't think about leadership in a vacuum of what is taking place. So the context is important to determining that leadership model. So that's what this set of theories try to look at. So, and yeah, the two main theories: the least preferred coworker model that was developed in the 60s. And I think the other model was the path goal theory, which was originally in 1957. Some really weird theories that spoke to if a leader identified that the leader had to identify whether or not an individual can easily see their path to their personal goals and make sure that their path to personal goals kind of coincided with the goals of the organization to try to get them to overlap with each other. So it's quite situational and context driven. So again, another set of ideas that was developed in that group of theories that they call these situational contingency theories. Really nice fancy name. I like. Problem with this is that there was a lack of supporting data, and therefore, anything that lacks data can't really be taken seriously as a valid approach to things. All right, so now we come to how many of you all recognize the name Max Weber or Weber, I might
Yes,
say.
sir. Yeah.
Right. For those of you who do management studies, you should come across Weber, and he started to talk about influence theories. So influence theories obviously is linked to charisma. And of course, we know the problem with charisma. And these charisma-based theories or influence-based theories is about people influencing others in terms of how they do what they do. And the problem with it, of course, is that although the observations was made as far back as 1940s, it was formalized in 1977. Can be explained by a set of testable variables. So here we go again. Again, it's talking about trying to measure charisma by using testable variables. Again, trying to measure human behavior here again, guys. Now, the problem again, as we always say, is if we go here, is that most times that charismatic leadership seemed to be taking effect was when there were things going wrong, one, and secondly, when people were willing to change whatever the status quo was. that was where charismatic leadership tended to come up. And charismatic leadership we know is dangerous because of the serious problem that a lot of charismatic people have misused their power and their ability to lead people, and that is one of the problems that comes up with those influence theories. So management or leadership as an influence is something that has to be paid with a little carefully. All right, then we have the reciprocal leadership theories. This starts to approach the ones that are going to influence us a little more. Reciprocal leadership theories emerge that focus on the relationship between the leader and the follower. So this is something that's going to start sounding very familiar because the relational leadership model that we're going to look at is going to look at that relationship between leaders and followers. And therefore, both leaders and followers need to have mutual goals and motivations. And that is a group of theories that started to develop in the post 1970 area, alongside the influence. So you'd realize that more behavioral theorists and stuff started to add their 2 cents into the whole debate. Um, so you'd see here leadership is not just something that a leader does to followers. Rather, leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants, values the contribution of the participants, shares power and authority between leaders and participants, and establishes leadership as an inclusive activity among interdependent people. So this starts to speak to the reciprocal nature of our relationship with leaders, and that's a critical element that we wanted to pay attention to. All right. Related to this, of course, is an empowerment aspect that comes up in the model, and the importance that well, I should say the shared importance of both the participant and the leader. Because if you think about it, if you're a leader all by yourself, you can't really do. You need people to follow, and those followers have to be able to help you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. Yeah, it's sort of like, these new political parties that rose in Trinidad, that without sufficient followers, they are ineffective as agents of change, and they want to change, and they want to change the way in which we go about governance in this country. But until they can provide some sort of major linkage to encourage followership, then that that is not going to happen. And it yeah, there's a way to find people and bring them into the fold of thinking. And I doubt that it's criticizing what's going on now. We have to appreciate where we are from what has come from. That technique of developing that is something that they have to pay more attention to in terms of being able to generate their reciprocal relationship with the leaders around them. All right, so the major theories that come from this subset of behavior is transforming leadership theory, the servant leadership theory, and the followership theory. So you have three models, each of which will play an important role in the development of the relational model. So the transforming leadership model is formulated where it tries to look at the process of where leaders and followers influence each other and transform behaviors. So that is its focus in terms of the transformational leadership. Um, it's about the mutual relationship that leaders and followers have with each other. But notice something: leaders appeal to followers in the sense of their ideals and moral values. And this is where we begin to make the connection now with leadership's ethical values or moralistic values with the quality of your leadership. And people will not follow you. Well, the right people wouldn't follow if you have poor moral values. Um, so the idea is that you want to be, espousing moral values such as freedom or liberty, justice, equality, peace, and humanitarianism. and not to emotions such as fear, greed, jealousy, or hatred. And you kind of wonder why sometimes people get involved, especially if we look back in history, where this theory positions itself. If you think about Hitler and the fact that he was actually able to use fear, and in fact, right now, a lot of political leaders use fear as a means of getting followers. The fear of somebody being, wrong for the economy, or somebody being wrong for your group of individuals. Um, Jealousy and hatred, that those are really negative methodologies of being able to attract people into your organization, and it really speaks to a very superficial type of organization. And you could actually see that in the political framework that we operate in here. It's about fear, and it's about jealousy, and it's about um, an imposed hatred of one group of individuals to another. If you look at our situation where there's this tribal behavior between the African population and the Indian population, that tribal behavior is really based on what? It's based on an unrealistic assumption that we don't need the same things. I don't know. I mean, it's very short-sighted, and it's of course extremely destructive. But it's one that seems to always work in the political environment. Um, you can see it happening in the United States, the red and the blue states and that kind of stuff, Democrats and Republicans, and then you have these subdivisions of the various minorities that exist in their system. Um, and the same thing applies. It seems as if that system pervades a lot of political systems, especially democratic systems, throughout the world. So it's something for us to think about. But this model is actually asking us to that in transformative leadership, leaders would appeal to followers utilizing higher ideals than what we're probably looking at before. It's sort of like if you think about the Obama campaign. If you ever go back and look at that, the Obama campaign spoke about being the change that you wanted to be, and that was a more positive approach to how you go about getting followership, as opposed to the approach that maybe Trump used in his last thing about build a wall, making America great again. That kind of divisiveness is something that we could look at. Um, so you can look at that, at how what the underpinnings are for this model across the board in terms of all of these aspects of the leadership model, the transformational leadership model. But here's where, in these models that we're looking at here, it's where the moral element or the ethical element starts to come up. They always are going to be looking at the ethical conduct of leaders and followers in trying to achieve the goals that they're looking at across the board. So these are a couple of transformational leaders. Sorry, can you guys recognize all of these leaders? Anybody? So we have JFK on the upper. That's my left. Mahatma Gandhi, who we had before. We have oh good Lord, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, closing off the top row, and then in the bottom we have Mother Teresa. Anybody recognize the next guy?
No, sir.
Not really. Not even.
Is it already? So, but
Yes,
everybody
sir.
knows the other guy,
Yeah.
Martin Luther King. All right. All right. So the guy in the middle there
That's
is anybody?
No.
All right. That's President Roosevelt. FDR.
Okay.
God,
Okay.
Now,
yeah, boy.
why he's
Yeah.
listed here is that he was able to, well, he led the US through the transformation of the economy out of the Great Depression, and he also played an integral role in World War II and that movement. This is one of the reasons why he's identified as a transitional leader or transformational leader. All right, of course, um, JF Kennedy is also one, but you could look at some of these people and what they were able to do in terms of transforming leadership. All right. Okay, so that's these individuals. Then you have transactional leadership as opposed to transformational leadership, and that's actually one of your debate topics. That transformational leadership is better than or superior to transactional leadership. I mean, the fact of the matter is that most of us use a lot of transactional leadership where we work and even in your home. So you try to make a transaction with somebody. If you do this, you'll get that kind of stuff. Um, it may be shallow or less purposeful, but transformational leadership requires that you are not asking people to do something for something, but you're asking them to value something and make a transformation based upon your willingness to do so. That's a interesting differential between the transactional and transformational leadership. So this is why it's one of the topics that we have. All right. Um, there's nothing wrong with each one. It's a different system that can be utilized from time to time. Um, but again, you notice that again, transformational leadership is speaking to those higher moral ideals and values. Those are things that we got to pay attention to. All right. So the servant leadership theory, in essence, what this means is that you have to stoop to conquer. I got that corrected the other day, meaning that in order to serve, in order to be a great leader, you need to serve your leadership, your followers. So that the focus of this particular theory is that a leader's function is to serve the needs of the followers and the organization and transform those people into leaders themselves, and facilitate their development, empower those individuals in your organization to be able to take over the reins and lead further transformation in themselves and others around them. So servant leadership model is a very technical model because it requires you divorcing yourself from power and giving up power. And that is something that a lot of people have problems with when it comes to leadership, because leadership comes inherent with power, and that's something that you're going to pay attention to in the model itself. So um, it it was a very not a lot of people use this model for one reason or the other, simply because there is the problem of giving up your power. That is problematic. But servant leadership is one of the models that's going to impact upon the relational model that we're going to look at here. That's why they refer to it as stewardship. You are, as a leadership, a servant leader, you're going to be both leader and participants and stewards of the organization and the individuals. Your design is to help everybody else find where they need to be going and help people become better people in the organization. So collectively, you're working together. So it's a great model, and this will be revisited when we start to look at leadership styles. One of the other chapters has to do with it. Um, so yeah, let me leave this model alone. This is the last model that came up here. This is the followership model. Um, so when we think about followers, we always think about sheep. So you have this categories here. So but remember, we talked about this before, the different types of followers and the responsibility of followers. Um, that most leadership models have to take into consideration the followership that you have. And this model identified a number of different ways in which you can start to think about your followership. All right, from being alienated to being sheep, yes, people, survivors, and effective followers. Now, there's a model that goes with this. I think I don't have it here, but the whole concept about followership model is that the leader has to empower and convert his sheep and yes people into effective followers to be a better leader. But understanding that your followers fall into these categories means that there are different strategies that you have to utilize to be able to move them into the effective area. That's of course making sure that you really want that, because followership is difficult when you have effective followers, because you can't force somebody to effectively follow you. You have to inspire somebody to effectively follow you. There's a difference. You can, well, you can do anything you want with sheep and yes people, but you have to work hard at people who are alienated, and in order to make them an effective follower. And you still, even when they become effective followers, they will challenge you every step of the way. So this followership model really speaks to the hard work of what leadership is all about. All right. So these are the followership qualities, effective followership qualities I talk about. And you'd notice that these kind of people would make great followers, but they also make leadership difficult, because you can't come to them unprepared. You have to be knowing exactly what you're doing, and in fact, in making sure that they are having an impact upon the choices that you're making and the decisions that you're trying to make as well. Um, so you see this word co-adventurers. Followers see themselves as co-adventurers with leaders. That's an important thing, because we kind of in this together, and if it depends upon how you want to be in it. That's the thing you want to do. Are you going to be there as sheep, just following the herd? Are you just going yes sir, or are you going to be an effective leader who's going to be critical of the decisions that we're making, and be proactive in the solutions when we come up with solutions that we agree to? Though that's the concept and ideas that we're looking at. So emergent paradigms. So this has to speak to the shifting away from the industrial paradigm, because, as I said before, most of leadership theory focused around its application in the corporate world, which meant it focused a lot on how industry works, and how organizations work. And most of that is, if you think about organizations, they're very, well, you can look at the down at the bottom here. They're very rational, technocratic, linear, quantitative. Those are the words that come together when you start to think about organizational leadership models. So we have to start to think about it from a more broader perspective now, and that's where we start to come to this reciprocal leadership theory. So each one of these theories is speaking to different things, but this is where we want to start to bring in the fact that the world it isn't a black and white situation. The world is gray, and it's not stable. It's a very dynamic place that we're looking at, and that's where we start to get into the chaos models, or chaos theory, so that there is very little order, or there's very little things that hold in in life around us. So this theory starts to speak to the fact that the world is not neat. Everything fits nicely in with each other. The world is inconveniently messy, and we have to find a way for leadership to work in that, and for us to be able to survive, and not only survive but thrive in a situation where it's highly chaotic. So that brings us into chaos theory. And the thing about in chaos, even in chaos, what was noticed was that even if there's a very chaotic situation facing us, we have we have systems that seem to develop inside of chaotic in circumstances, and that system or thing that develops allows for survival. And that's what the theory starts to speak about, that chaos might be unpredictable, but there are patterns of behavior that occur inside that chaos that allow us to exist. Look at the chaos around us now, and look at how we have responded to that apparent chaos into a pattern of events and activities that changes our behavior from before, but it means that we are modifying our behavior to adapt to that particular thing. So again, chaos theory is is, as you said, chaos has been defined as order without predictability. Another person talked about it as displaying hidden patterns, and those are the kind of things that chaos theory really speaks to. It's a world in which you have to deal with things in part. Is this the correct solution to the problem? Not necessarily, but it's partially correct. And that's something that I talk about here, in that in a chaotic system, you're not going to have everything being correct all the way through. You might have partial correction, partial correct things with some things wrong. So you're not going to get one answer to the problems that you face. It may be a combination of different partial responses that give rise to an overall correct response. Um, and that's the way it's going to have to work. Um, a lot of people don't like this concept because it speaks to a lack of what's the term I want to use, structure, and they don't like it when things are not structured according to laid out plans and things. Again, you're trying to put structure on something that is structureless, so that's a difficult thing. So, and I know I like I'm pretty, what's the word I want to use, OCD. I have some degree of OCD in my behavioral patterns, and the fact of the matter is that OCD people like myself have problems when things fall out of line, and then you don't feel comfortable in an environment in which things aren't in order, or there's or lack of order in certain things, and unfortunately that's the world we live in. There's no real order to things. Things don't line up, and they're not in straight lines, and nice concentric circles and stuff. Things are just kind of scattered all over the place, and if you can't adjust it and deal with it, well, sorry for you. I don't know what to do. Does anybody have that kind of problem dealing with the world around them sometimes?
So that is me times
Yes,
10.
I'm sure.
It's frustrating, but we have to realize that this system of chaos is the reality that we have to live in.
So
And
I have a very hard time accepting that.
you do?
I I really do. That's why I say like that. The in terms of structure, like that is me times 10. Like I'm very particular with that. So
Well, and this is part of the situation that we tend to um, to develop. We try to put structure into things to make it sensible to us. And I mean, I understand that because I have that OCD tendency as well. But understand in a situation of, let's look at the COVID situation. Until we started to understand more and more about the disease and how it was transmitted, we could not develop systems to be able to handle it. So that's why the whole thing is the chaos system and system. So yes, it's chaos, but then you try to impose a system on it to try and help to mitigate against the chaos, and that's what we do. And one of the things that they identified as being very important in the systems that we develop for dealing with this chaos is this concept of amness networking. That's the phrase we would use today, but back in the days when they were developing this anding that they talked about, and andness is really about the networks that you develop in order to get your system to work properly and to find solutions for the problems that you're having. And that's a quite an important thing. And the other aspect that besides the andness, you have the but and not either or. But and means, oh sorry, both and not either or, meaning that you have to look at solutions as not just one and done, but this and that and this and that to try and fix it, right? Because if we don't try multiple methods of repairing or fixing or treating with a problem, we're likely to go and fail. But if we could get some partial success in one approach and then partial success from another approach, maybe the collection of the two approaches can eventually solve the whole situation. This sort of like the whole situation with dealing with the rate of infection of COVID-19 in the country. It's not just one thing that we have to do, but a group of different processes that we brought together to try and find a solution to the one thing. So it's wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands. So it's this and that. It's not just wear a mask. You understand? And for people who are more systematic in their thinking, they would not like they don't like the fact that there's not just a one and done answer, which is why a lot of people, especially leaders too, you have this problem as well. They want a one solution, which is a vaccine, because a vaccine is a one step process that gets us through this whole system. But this is more complicated because until that vaccine is developed, it's social distancing, wearing masks, washing hands, and um, oh god, what are the other steps that we're talking about? Staying home when you're sick,
Large groups.
and not getting into large groups, which is something that from a social perspective we don't like. We thrive when we are together in groups.
Yeah.
We do better when we are in larger groups and we enjoy each other's company and so on. But the problem is right now that social gathering is counterproductive to the whole situation that we face. So those are things that we can look at. So these are the primary systems of. So you have to go through and read these things about chaos systems. I found it quite interesting. Um, and then they identified another one here, authentic leadership, which is one of the latest developments. And authentic leadership is really leadership that is constructed upon high moral and ethical standards. Um, and it's a construct that is based upon being very positive and very basically authentic and real. All right, authentic leadership. So uh, it has, as it says here, is a confluence of positive psychological, transformational leadership and moral ethical leadership. Authentic leaders as somebody who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral, unethical, future oriented, and gives priority to development of associates to be leaders. Ooh, that's a lot for a leader, boy. Jeez. I mean, think about it. I mean, look at the qualities that they're talking about there for this leader. Confident, hopeful, optimistic. That's one set. Resilient, transparent, moral, and ethical. That's another set. Future oriented and gives priority to the development of associates to be leaders. That's a huge ambit of activities that you're asking a leader to do. Make sense?
So,
Yes.
so thankfully, I could say with some degree of confidence that I've had the privilege of working with people who fit into this category. So
Very good. That is good because it is a very hard place to sit with. But authentic leadership is not necessarily as hard as we think it is, but it means being consistent in your behavior all the way through. That is the thinking of behind it. But when you start to read about it, you start to say, "God, this is a lot of stuff." But literally, when you start to think about it, if you are naturally somebody who's like this, then it's easy. If you think about it, right? And then the areas you can work on to help them.
So that's the thing. I mean, when you speak about this type of leadership, it means that this has to be the person's lifestyle or their modus operandi. This has to be who the person is. You know,
Correct.
you can't just want to adopt
You
this
can't
style of
fake it.
leadership just so. You know,
Yeah,
you have to live this. You have to be this, right?
yeah. And that is, but how do we get to a position where we are like this? That's to do with a lot of our experiences. We have to change some of our behaviors because as we were growing up, we may have done other things. So there's certain things that we can work on, and that's the whole point about it. And that's where the relational model is going to come up. That there are aspects of leadership that we need to work on that we may be weak in. You understand? Because nobody is going to have every one of these characteristics sitting there just waiting for you to have it available. Things have to be worked on. You understand? So um, this authentic leadership is actually one of the models that it really sounds really idealistic, but understand that the reality is that this is the kind of leadership that we're asking for, that we want people to be able to have. Um, and it's the positive leadership that we would like to have, especially when things are going wrong. Um, it recognizes that we need the powerful impact of hope, trust, positive emotions, and we need to understand the attitudes and behavior of our followers. So we want, it's not like what we'd like mom to be or dad to be, that kind of paternal type of thing, but more interestingly enough, followers are especially important to authentic leaders, because authentic leaders include authentic followers as well. So it's not just about the leader being authentic, but the followers have to. So it's not as do as I say, but not as I do kind of thing. Everybody has to be in the same sort of meld. Um, Sometimes comes across as being kind of cult like in its leadership thing. Huh? So if you ever really think about it from that. All right, so they go on, of course, to describe all of these characteristics that the authentic leader has, um, which is more repetitive of the same things that they talk about: raise optimism, strengthen resilience. And this is pointed. Authentic leaders are not fake. You can't fake that type of leadership, and they are originals, not copies. I like that because you have to be that way all the way through. You can't be a photocopy or a cutout of something that was from before, kind of thing. So again, you have to be that way all the way through. You have to have developed yourself through that way. Um, Again, the thing about it is that we have to ask ourselves the question: is this something that we have to wait on somebody, to emerge out of our society who has these characteristics, or can we help to develop those characteristics along the way? And that's the challenge of modern leadership and exploring leadership program that we're doing. All right. So these are the models I think that the authentic leadership model being the last one that we looked at. But what you looked at is all of these models are now going to play their role in determining the the model that we're going to be looking at and how they've impacted upon the situation that we're looking at now, which goes on to the second where am I? All right, so it goes on to the third chapter, sorry, which is the relational model. Oh, ooh, we had some more people coming in. Oh, Mr. Culture, you're here? Let's see you come in. Let me just update this register.
Yes, I am here. I'm here. Yeah.
All right, so Culture is here. Jones came. If Jones is here, can you answer?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, let's take notes of that. Sullivan and Thomas.
Thomas, yes, sir.
And what about Sullivan? Probably not. All right, so let's just. All right, so any questions that you would like to ask about 900 people died. Okay, that's an. Unfortunately, I can't see your comments, but Espinoza noted that 900 people died in the Jim Jones fiasco, 300 being 17 and under. All right, and Renee is asking if anybody's looking at the U.S. Vice President debate last night. What was the point that Rennie was trying to make? Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. Okay, interesting. It's interesting that we have that leadership argument going on now in country that's. I mean, regardless of how we might feel about the United States, the fact of the matter is that we have to pay attention to what's happening there because of the influence that they have on our lives, um, and its relative importance in the direction of the hemisphere, and how they behave. So leadership there impacts upon the entire world because they're the largest economy in the world and they have a great influence on things. So when things go wrong, things throw us. So anybody has any questions coming out of the models that existed before that we're looking at here? Because now we're going to be going into chapter 3. I'm going to have to speed through this a little bit because we have a bit of time. So in this model, and this one you probably need to do a little more introspective because this model lays out the relational leadership model, the one that we want you to consider in terms of building your context that it comes from, and the construct that it. All right, and then you'd see some of the influences from the other models that we just looked at having on this. So again, we have to start by defining that leadership has to do with relationships, and those relationships cannot be understated or overstated as this thing is. Leadership is inherently relational communal process, and that brings us back to the definition that we have of leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. Now, we met this definition in the first chapter of defining what the relational leadership model is. So now you should be able now to understand that the model that we're looking at is referred to as the RML model or the relational leadership model. So let's start to look at the the focus of this. That's, as I said, the RML model is purposeful and builds commitment towards positive purpose that are inclusive of people and diverse points of view, empowers those involved, is ethical, and recognizes that all four of these elements are accomplished by being process oriented. So those are the 5 primary components of that organization, of this model that we're going to be examining. So again, this is a vision of the leadership model in a diagrammatic situation or from a diagrammatic point. And this is straight out of the text. This is a visual implement thing. So you see the 5 areas: the process being what holds everything together. You have the empowerment, the inclusiveness, the purpose, and the ethical. So you notice that the purpose is superimposed upon all other aspects because it is what the kind of glue that holds all of the aspects together. As we start to look at it, we will see what's going on. So the model doesn't describe the way leadership is currently practiced, but this is a model of an aspirational model that we want you all to begin to look at developing. It's good to use those 5 elements, but this is a critical element that we want to remember, that the relational leadership model is an aspiration to a better system of leadership, meaning that we are hoping that we can arrive at a more idealistic version of it. We may not be able to get the ideal, but if we fall short of the ideal, then we will get some way into having this leadership model there. So let's start to look at the first thing, the purpose element. And the purpose is driven out of the vision. So if you think about any organization, all organizations have a vision and mission statement. In today's environment in particular, most modern organizations have spent time and money to develop a vision and a mission for their company and what they do. And the intention of those vision and mission really is to try to encompass all the other aspects of the model that you're talking about. So it's important, therefore, that the outcome is vision driven and not position vision driven. And that's a critical difference because some organizations are set up with the person who leads in mind and not what the function or purpose is about. And that is a dangerous precept to use because if we go with the position, we are going to end up with the wrong motivation for getting things done. So that's something to pay attention. Individuals in the leadership process need to know themselves. Well, we know about that element. Oh, no, you all will be presenting on that. The first chapter is actually knowing yourself. All right, understanding self. So the first aspect is that in order to begin the process of developing good leadership, you need to know yourself. And that knowing aspect is a critical element because you need to know who you are to be able to understand how that you're going to be aware self and others, and therefore that leads to your actions. And this is the whole thing we talk about. We said in the last model, authentic leadership model, you've been able to work with people who seem to exhibit those things, but you don't arrive at that place of being an authentic leader overnight. It's a process of getting to the point where you know who you are as an individual, you are aware of others, you are once you're aware of yourself and you know your limitations and your strengths, you can be the person you are and then act accordingly. So it's a process again that is not it doesn't stop and start. It's an ongoing process of continuous development. So there are three components. Of course, these three components are related: the knowing, being, doing, and it's one that you have to constantly be revising all the time. Knowing, being, doing, because it's interrelated activities that influence the other. So the if you perceive yourself in one way, that influences the way you think about others, and then it influences your belief systems, and then that then influences the way in which you act. So that circular thinking process, or the knowing, being, doing aspect, is one that is going to impact upon you. But every time you make that circle, there should be greater awareness. So it shouldn't be a circle that comes back on itself. It should be a circle that begins to spiral outwards as your self-awareness grows and you become more aware of things. And that's sort of like life. It's a spiral, outward going spiral, where every time you go through the process, you're going to observe more and more about yourself, understand more and more about others around you, and improve your behavior and activities as you go through. So it's sort of that perspective of life is growing in a spiral format around and around. It's a kind of metaphysical kind of thing that you're thinking about there. But that circular movement is not really circular, more, as I should say, it's more of a spiral. Because each time you come around, you should spiral outwards and make a larger circle of awareness and activities. Those are things you want to talk about. So and the way they talk about it here, the head, the heart, and the practice. So this is your head is about what you know and what you do. Your heart is about how you think and how you believe and that side of stuff. And then your practice is about the doing. If you feel this way, then act this way. If you don't like if you understand about discrimination and poor judgment of leaders, and you develop that information in your heart, you perceive it to be in, and when we say your heart, in your context of thinking and rationalizing things, you see it as being unfair, then you start to value fairness in your treatment. Then you have to practice that. You can't then go out there and practice what you think you don't like. All right. So it's the Palmer here uses this head hard practice for teaching, but interestingly, this practice of teaching actually applies to leadership, and I found that was interesting in the text that we looked at. All right, people would collaborate with people who are credible. So we like to work with people who we trust. That's basically. And credible people are people who know what they are about. So their knowledge aspect is going to be a thing. Leaders need to demonstrate competency and maintain a certain amount of knowledge. So that's the knowing aspect. Um, in order to be a good leader, you have to know what you're about and know what you're trying to do. So you're going to work for somebody who actually knows things. Do they need to know everything? That's a good question to ask. Do you think a leader needs to know everything? Must they be an expert in everything?
No,
Nope. Why
no.
No,
not?
not really.
So no one person could know everything, and
Correct.
I,
There
I
you go.
believe I believe I am of the belief that a big part of being a good leader is being humble enough to have your followers teach you things as well.
Being
Right.
able to learn,
Say that again. Sorry.
being able to learn.
Right. That's very good. But the knowing aspect, therefore, means that what you claim to know, you actually do, and what you claim to not know, you're open with it. That's the part of it. They
Yeah,
demonstrate competence and maintain a certain amount of knowledge. They don't have to be the master of all knowledge. And that's the first change that we may need to accept in our leaders, that the leaders do not necessarily need to be the fountain of all knowledge, but they may have the capacity to allow us to access more knowledge together or independently. Meaning that as a leader, I need to be open to the fact that we don't know everything. So then, well, how do we get the information we need? Which means I must be able to create a learning environment that will encourage not only my learning, but your learning as well. That makes sense? Yeah? So, yes, you're correct. A leader does not need to know everything, but he needs to know his or her own limitations
yeah,
and be quite aware of that, because there are far too many people. And in Trinidad, we have that thing a lot. You don't know something, but yet still you're trying to fake it. We had that situation down real cool here. You ever try to ask somebody for directions to find some place? They always have an answer for you.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Nobody
yeah.
wants to say, well, I'm not sure. I don't know. We always want to know. Yeah, you go down so and take a left, right? Lost like hell. All right. So that knowing aspect starts the process. Then you have the skill levels here that they're talking about: conceptual skills, the ability to think creatively; technical skills, this is the being aspect that they're describing here, the expertise required for the position; the tactical skills, the negotiation skills, your soft skills, the human relation skills, those negotiating, those empathizing, that those knowing the processes that you need to be, they actually help you to develop your ability to know each other and know other people as well. That those are skills that good leaders must have, especially those tactical skills there of human relationships. All right, the being means knowing what values and attributes define you as a leader. So being is, who are you? What is your character? Your old thief. You understand? What are you? Who are you? And you really need to do some serious self-explanatory or self-exploration to determine who you are as an individual. What are the values that make you who you are? And are these values something that you're willing to share with others as being an attribute of good leadership? And it can't be something that you just arrive at, hey, this someone good. No, it has to be something that you have um, committed yourself to, that it's in your very actions that you behave in that particular manner. All right. um, the doing aspect, of course, of knowing and being means acting upon your belief structure. Character and knowledge are not enough in facilitating. You have to do, and when you do things, it has to produce results that will help you accomplish the purpose and vision of your organization or your activities that you're looking at. And so when you start to apply this on organization, or that has a more social, how many of you all here are part of social groups, things like the Rotary Club or the Lions or the Leos or whatever? Anybody? Or what about church related groups or cultural related groups? Are there anybody, actually, is there anybody in among us who participates in that activity? Anybody?
I would say that was back then when I used to go to school. So
Yeah, but right. So I mean, but what was it that you did back in school?
Red Cross, Girl
Uh-huh.
Guides, 4-H, everything. A part of the church.
Church activities. All right. So
Yeah.
now that you've grown up and you started to work, do you still not find time to do some of that activities?
Nope.
You have
Just work.
children. You have children.
Yes. A daughter.
Right. So what example are you showing her? Did you think about that?
No.
Well, think about it. What example are you showing her? Because what you do teaches more than what you say. Remember
True.
that.
Yeah.
I've noticed you're alone in answering this question. Is it that there are lots of other people who are, and I'm not talking about in the current context, obviously, but are active in some sort of social work? It doesn't have to be all of those things, but at least one aspect, maybe two aspects or something like that, in which you have some sort of community work going on or interaction that's taking place.
So not right
So
now
I
though.
am a part
At
of
one
a
point
church
in time,
group.
yes, but I intend to um, get back into that in any future. I can't say how far, but I do intend to. And
Yeah,
I
but
can't help it. I have a
what was it that you were into in the past?
so I was in Cub Scouts. I
All
was
right.
also in cadets, and I also served as the PRO on Custard's Guild, Student Guild.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Which one? The last one?
No, no, no. This was some time ago. This
Okay.
was some years ago. I was also a student ambassador and all that in Custard.
Right. So those are social, and see, that's our college attempt to help to bring a more social dynamic of activities to college life, rather than just coming in for classes and running away and that's it. That's one of the things that we try to get done. All right. Um, but you understand the whole aspect of demonstrating your capacity can be better done in a social or cultural environment than it can be done in a work environment. Though in your work environment, you have those elements that can take place there as well. So something for you all to think about in terms of getting into it. So here we're talking about making sure that you act, your decision making and acting and the doing aspect. And I don't know how many of you all ever come across this, but there are a lot of leaders who don't like to do things because it's not right just yet. And when it's not right, you just pause. And then after a while, nothing happens. So there's a lot of leadership that kind of gets that fixation, and therefore What happens there is simply this: because you can't get it right, you're not going to do it. And that's a bad fixation. Why? Because you're not going to take a chance. And if you take a chance and you don't get it right, then you try again. It's better
So,
that you do something, fail, and try again than to do nothing at all.
so
Yes?
I'm feeling very attacked right now.
You feeling what?
Very attacked right now.
Attacked. Why is that?
Because I feel like you're reading me.
Am I?
Yes.
But I'm not. It's not meant to focus on you in particular. This is Isaac.
I know I understand, but just like through the topics and the discussion, I starting to like
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, huh?
hmm
It means that you can identify with the concepts, and that's a good thing. Because if you can identify with the concepts, then makes it all right. Somebody said they were in the We program on junior achievement. That's good stuff. All right, I'm gonna try a little something here, a slightly different. Um, let's see if you can you all see this still? Because I need to see when people are making comments because there's a lot of people who haven't been able to. Whoops, wrong one. That'll be this one here. All right. I can't see the comments that they're making. Can you see this, or is it just a waste of time?
No, I can see it too. I guess if I could see it, anybody could see it.
That's Ken Roy.
Yes, sir. But sir,
I can see it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
um, well, to begin with, I find that this course is extremely interesting, sir. Um,
Glad
reason
to know. Hmm.
reason being that I have worked in a number of different industries, from
That's good.
manufacturing to military to I've been in a lot of different things, sir. Right?
All right.
Even in like non-English speaking countries, I spent years in different parts of the world and whatnot, right? But in all these experiences, I've seen many different styles of leadership, sir. And this
That's
is
correct.
this
Yeah.
is this is the first time in my life I'm actually getting a clear overview of what leadership is. So this is kind of like if you step back and look at the whole picture. So I've never actually done anything like that before, but this is the first time I'm actually getting that holistic view of leadership, sir. And
That's good.
even
Hmm.
where I work now, sir, as a firefighter, sir, I see a lot of different styles of leadership. Some really good examples and some polar opposites. So I think where this is concerned, it's actually giving me a sense of how to make an informed decision on what leadership really should be, sir. So that is just something I wanted to point out, sir.
That's good. I like your insight and your sharing. That should encourage people, especially Miss Moniquette, who thinks she's having problems thinking like I'm picking on her, but I'm not picking on you. Just that you are you are experiencing something called possibly cognitive dissonance. Something that you all should come across with from another thing, and that you're seeing things and hearing things um, that you know to be correct, but you're working in an environment that does not necessarily support the activity. Is that the way you're feeling, Miss Monica?
So are you talking to me?
Yes, I was talking to you. You're the one who opened this kind of worms.
Oh no, it's just so many things that you were discussing, especially when you
it
spoke.
fa-
Huh?
it falls in your court.
Yeah, not necessarily in like different environments like work and stuff, but just me as a person.
Well, that's good. Because maybe it's it means you're on the right stages of development. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, is it? All right. Okay. So let's continue moving forward a little bit. Let's see. Can you all see this still? It's just I want to keep a little attention of the all right, of the thing. So we talked about, from what I'm seeing here, right? So this is the last thing, knowing the outcome of doing feedback systems. Right, about some people not acting. Um, so some people being caught up in perfection, and I understand why, because we always have this thing about if we're going to do something, let's do it right. But the fact is, you don't get it right immediately. You have to take chances. If you don't take chances, then you're not going to learn. And that's what this model is trying to tell you, that if you are locked into perfection, then you're not going to get this you're not going to set up a system where you're going to try and get to learn from it. Because think about the way in which we learn socially together, by trying things together. Because the way in which, if three or four of us get together and try to do something, each of us will teach each other different things, and that helps to shape how we develop our solutions and how we get things done from a shared environment, rather than let's do everything my way. And you may have worked in situations like that. Who knows, you might have worked in a group where um, one person has determined that we're doing things this way, and doesn't allow for anybody else to say, well, let's try this and let's try that. And unfortunately, in this situation here, even though you're a leader, you're going to recognize the fact that you have to give people chances to find a different way. And who knows, maybe the way they're talking about or conceiving is going to be superior to yours. Because as I always say, there's more than one way to break an egg. All right? Or skin a cat, as the kid may be. All right? So this is where leaders promote learning in at least three ways: through their own learning, by helping others to learn, or by shaping and contributing to a culture that promotes learning. And you can't do that if you fail to act. You have to act on those things. All right. So being more rational leadership is purposeful. So being purposeful means that you're making a commitment to your goals or activities, and you have to be able to collaborate with other people to find the common ground necessary to drive your purpose. Now, again, developing your sense of purpose is going to be critical in determining the focus and the methodology that you're going to be dealing with. Now, for all right, so they're talking about here, in terms of this program, you're looking at developing, um, creating positive change through some sort of cohesive activity. So understand that the first thing we're looking at here is something positive, not something negative. That's the first concept. But again, positive and negative is relative. And then, of course, you're trying to build a shared vision. Now, if you have a goal and you're unable to share it with other people so that other people could adopt it as a shared vision, you're not going to go anywhere, because you don't have the same position that you're trying to get to, because you have not been able to, or the position that you've taken, or the goal or purpose that you've designed, is not one that is all encompassing, because it may not be, and that's part of the whole process. In terms of setting up your purpose and function of your organization, or any organization, has to be something that people are willing to share and willing to become involved with. All right. So I don't know if you've ever worked in an organization that purposely tried to rip people off. How long would you stay working in an organization like that? How good do you feel working in an organization that's perceived in society outside there as being negative to the society? Those are where you have a disconnect between the function and purpose of one business and the its impact upon the society that they exist in. And that is something that you have to pay attention to whenever you are, as in a leadership position, setting up the purpose and goals of your organization. So those are things that you want to pay attention to. And that's the primary reason for that is because it is the goal and the driving force of your entire organization. If you don't get your goals, anybody here ever took part in vision and mission development for your organization?
Nope.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
right now, sir.
I mean, all right. So Joanne, you said yes.
No.
Jade.
Jade, right. How
Yeah.
was it done? Was it
What's
was
that,
it
sir?
how was it done? Was it something that they asked you all to contribute, or
Well, we already have an existing one, but they asked if we could make it better, basically.
right?
So
So
I work in quality assurance, so we were tasked with
you
doing a
drafted it?
strategic plan.
Okay. Right. So usually what you do is when you're doing strategic planning, you go back to your goals and vision and mission statements to be able to move that
Yeah,
forward. Right. That's a good thing because ever so often organizations are supposed to be doing vision and mission reviews because in order for an organization to remain vibrant and connected with the current environment, they must review those things. All right. So that's why they talk about here. It's important that all group members be able to articulate that purpose and use it. So sometimes you're not going to actually going to change it, but by doing exercises where it might be reviewed, you get a situation where people become aware again of what the vision and mission statement and they have a sense of involvement and I helped shape this vision and mission and that lends to people buying into the objectives of the organizations. So it's important that you can make that connection and that the purpose of your organization means something to people. And that's why they speak to personalized visions and socialized vision. Those two concepts actually help to make your vision a little clearer with your organization. And that personalized vision refers to the individual feeling some degree of connection and with the plan or the organization. If they don't feel that connection, they won't adopt it. It would, and they won't find themselves committing to it. So, how many of you all, for example, are familiar with the vision and mission statement of the college? Hmm, important, isn't it? I see nobody's volunteering. That does not bode well. You all remember? What about our tagline? That's the one you might quicker remember.
Transforming something. I
Uh-huh.
can't.
See?
It's transforming life.
transforming lives.
Uh-huh. Well, that's part of the tagline. All right. You all remember that. Transforming lives, transforming the
Yeah,
nation.
I'm doing a quick Google search right now, sir.
Yeah, go ahead, do the Google search. But that speaks to the socialized vision that we're talking about. Building a vision among the group members, recognizing that people support what they help create. You understand? And that's something that our first set of students were involved in the creation of the vision and mission statement of the college. And back in 2000, it was actually back in 1997, 98, we started work on the development of the college vision and mission statement. And we got so many people involved in the process that by the time we got to the point where we actually wrote it up and shared it back, everybody could see their little piece in it. So it became that shared vision that was developed by everybody in the organization. If you follow what I'm talking about, sharing the vision doesn't mean that everybody must put a piece in, but if they can see the pieces that they contributed to or that they linked with, then it's going to mean more, and therefore that's going to help them to want to share that vision with people even more. All right. So, and this is an important part. You don't, as a leader, you don't simply force your vision onto people. People have to want to adopt your vision, and that's a critical element, and that will help to make your leadership more purposeful. All right. So if we continue here, so being purposeful with a group, that includes positive change. Vision animates in spirits. I don't know if that's correct. No, that's a quote. So it's in spirits, transforms purpose into action. All right. So I wonder if that's supposed to be inspires. I'll have to check that back. All right. So again, the vision and mission element is critical to the developing of that purposefulness of your organization. Um, and so they keep on talking about the development because I can't fully explain today, but if you look at it, the core of vision and mission statements, they're very critical to helping organizations in particular to share its goals among its participants, not only those who work as members of the organization, but also shareholders and stakeholders. That's important because they should have been part of the process of developing your goals and that kind of stuff. Because you remember, you're doing something and it affects people. So if it affects people, then you have to to know, well, what do you want? How do you want this impact to work with you? So from very small to very large organizations, at some point in time, you need to be doing some work on making sure that your purpose is clearly defined and shared among all of the individuals who can immediately impact upon it. All right. So that's something that we want to pay attention to. All right. So again, now here we're talking about making sure your purpose is something that you're working towards positive change. One common purpose that pulls people together is to working towards change, and that change must be positive. Facilitating that change is something that we agree to. And this is one of the things where charisma can get misdirected, because you can position change that is inherently negative in a positive light. And this is something that people like Hitler and Jim Jones were able to disguise their true messages, and then eventually the negative aspect of that change began to expose itself. Because so Jim Jones was part of that whole thing where he was believed to be a messiah and supposed to have had all this power, and there was another batch of people who were like that and believed a number of things, but the government of the United States was getting kind of involved in that his activities and was trying to crack down on it. And that's actually when he went into this suicidal mood and killed everybody one time. Um, there's another person who did, I think his name was David Koresh. That was another kind of small cult in Waco, Texas. You could look that up. There was that cult that developed there, where he was perceived by his followers to be like a Christ-like person, and he would basically be having children with all the women of the group. It was really, again, it started off with them trying to do something positive, but they are able to manipulate the individuals around them through their charismatic tendencies to focus on something that becomes negative and self-serving. So you should look at some films on those things, right, to see how that whole um, charismatic leadership is so dangerous when it comes to those kind of things. Um, can't think of one, but there have been a number of programs that have depicted both the Jim Jones situation, the Waco, Texas situation, and other leaders of that nature with that charismatic thing. Lots and lots about Hitler. All right, so this is the thing. You need to be watching the change that you're looking at. So it really needs to be when you're trying to set up your groups and organizations, is that the change that you're looking for is intended to make some sort of difference, some positive difference in the lives of people around us. This is why I asked about you all being part of social groups that you probably participate in. So look at how this change theory speaks to when you're looking at what makes us want to change. Generally, because something has happened, and the model here talks about being presenting as a moment when some unfreezing happens. So it unfreezes a situation that was fixed. You make changes and then you freeze it back to hold it. So these changes make, so there's some trigger that causes the unfreezing. You fix it and then freeze it back. But this model is actually saying maybe you shouldn't be freezing it back. Maybe it might be better to keep it in a kind of fluid type of mentality, semi-fluid, so that it holds. Because the problem with why things end up becoming negative or bad is because it does not change with the environment that it works in. And that's where they talk about, instead of it becoming refrozen, keep it in a more slush type environment, so that it could again be addressed quickly rather than casting it in concrete all over again. All right, guys. So that is about how change takes place. Of course, they talk about change here from the classical model, as a process moving from a state to a transitional state to the desired state. So that's the cycle that they talk about, describing the change process, moving from your current situation to a transitional situation to the desired situation. So it's that kind of circle that you're looking at here. That's the old classical model developed from the 1950s, as you can see. But the model that we're looking for is probably going to be less rigid than that. So again, that process, as again any change process, and we're going to look at leading change as the last group is going to be presenting on leading change, because leading change is probably the most difficult aspect of any sort of organizational leadership objective. Leading change is anxiety causing that can create some serious problems within organizations. So this is the whole the change process that we're looking at, that we need to be getting involved with. And you have, every time you make these changes, you're going to have to make sure that you connect back with your leaders and followers. You need to be connecting and making sure that the whole group is moving with the change and we're not leaving people behind. So when that change is made, we got to make sure that everybody's moving along, or else people might get lost along the way. And when new people come in, they have to be indoctrinated in that change as well. Right. So the next aspect is that leadership is inclusive, the relational leadership inclusive, and that inclusivity requires that we must be able to engage other people and in a meaningful manner, which means valuing and actively engaging diversities in views, approaches, styles, aspects of individuality, such as your sex, your culture, your sexual orientation. All of these things have to be inclusive. Now, this is critical, a critical part of the model, because if you can't get this right, you can't move beyond this. Leadership has to be inclusive. It's inclusive easily when you have people who hold the same values. but it becomes more difficult to be inclusive when you're dealing with people who are almost diametrically opposed to your given positions in life and your perception of what the real world is about. So if you have very strong views about um, sexuality and abortion and those kind of things, when you come across people who are diametrically opposed to your view, how are you going to be inclusive in that sense? And that's the challenge that you face as a rational leader in this model. That inclusive model requires a lot of effort on the part of the leader and, of course, the followers. Both groups have to work at being inclusive. But to be an effective leader, you need to be inclusive. You can't be excluding people. Because if you think about it, in some organizations, you really don't have much control over who's coming in, especially in social organizations, people coming from different walks of life. So in order to be able to include them, you have to be able to appreciate and understand. More importantly, you don't have to agree with their position. I'm not saying that you must agree with the position of somebody in terms of their position about something, but you need to understand why their position may exist. And that understanding is going to be a critical element that you have to pay attention to. It is better that you understand why people are the way they are than judge them for the position that they're in. It makes it a lot better. Understanding is going to be more important in that sense. And then even though they are different, then you have to actually look at the value they can bring to you, and that's the hard part about being inclusive, because it's easy to include people that we agree with, but it's going to be extremely difficult with people we don't have that connection with. All right. And of course, if you are not inclusive of those differences, you're going to weaken your organization by it, because those differences actually add value to organizations. Um, because they bring different perspectives, they bring different skill levels, they bring different methods of thinking about things, perceiving things that you as an individual can't think about, because you're already kind of programmed through your influences and your background and one way of thinking. So this is where we talk about being collectively smarter. You're collectively smarter by allowing people with different positions, points of views, and different lifestyles to look at the same issue, look at the same problem, and come up with a different point of view in that whole situation. So that's the other critical element of it. So there are different methods of dealing with it, and trying to create that inclusive environment. Again, it's an environment you have to create, because if as a leader you are not inclusive, it's going to create a situation where your followers are also going to behave in a similar manner, and that's something that you have to pay attention to as well. You can't be um, pushing people away and expect that your followers will behave in the same manner. They will also do the same things as well. So that's kind of like what you see happening around certain political parties, where they don't accept different cultures, but rather they build walls around themselves and create a silo. And they only include people who are similar thinking. And that's dangerous, because then you start to create more animosity in the wider society for your group and your thing. So you have to be able to be more inclusive in your behavior, and try to remember that the way in which you think is not the only way or the only perception that exists. You have to be open to other people's perceptions, ideas, concepts, those kind of things. All right. So there's a lot of the we talk that you have to be dealing with there. You need to be thinking about we, and you need to also think about how you arrive at decisions. So rather than voting on things, maybe you should look at consensus models. That's what this piece is talking about. Consensus. What's the difference, guys, between voting and consensus? Anybody wants to give us a distinction?
So is it that consensus speaks more towards a trend versus voting that is more defined by choice? I don't know. I'm really guessing here. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of on the right track. Anybody else wants to um, read in into that distinction between using systems of voting as opposed to systems of consensus?
So I don't know. When I think about it, I get the impression that I don't know, it may not be what you're looking for, but I'm just sharing. I would say that a consensus is a bit more passive, and voting is more active in terms of the approach that you use to get the result that you want.
Okay, so when a leader or a meeting says they're going to use a consensus approach to arriving at the decision, it means that it in voting it means the majority rules. Consensus means that everybody agreed to this. You understand the difference?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay,
Consensus means that there was
Yeah,
no voting, but by consensus we
yeah,
said everybody
yeah.
came together. So
agree.
it means that it's not just one. So I might
Okay,
come to you with one idea, but that idea might be modified by through the consensus model. So instead of saying, okay, we'll do A, B, but consensus says no, we can't do A, B, but we have to do A, C, and F. And that's how we get consensus by give and take until eventually we develop a model that everybody feels comfortable with, in the sense that not every aspect of the response everybody has an agreement with, but the overall solution is something that they all come together with. So in consensus means that there's nobody who's against it. You understand that's a huge difference between voting for something, because when we vote for things, it means that some people just absolutely disagreed with what you did, and but I vote no, and there may be three or four out of a group of eight. Let's say it's three. That means you know at least a third of the people in your organization don't agree with this, but because you had five votes, majority rules. What happens to the other three? You
so that's like
understand?
general elections. That is where
Correct.
we have a
Yes.
part of the population that heavily
Does,
dissatisfied with the final results.
and does not vote. And
Mm-hmm.
you have to be
And is yeah.
concerned when that is the majority of your population. So one of the things I always pay attention to when I look at elections is the participation rate. How many people did not vote? And that is an alarming statistic in certain, like in our last general elections, our participation rate was poor. Less than 50% of the people actually exercise their franchise. And it was to be expected because of the COVID situation. But understand that it does not augur well for organization to for a country to run on a what we refer to as minority decision making as opposed to consensus. But you understand that whole inclusive issue about finding consensus as a technique, because elections is kind of like you're in and you're out. It's not really inclusive in its thinking process. It's you're either in or you're out. And when you're on the out group, you don't feel included. You feel, well, I wasn't for this. And that means when things go wrong, somebody, and as it would always tend to happen, the person there would say, I tell all you, it wasn't going to work, you know? And you get that kind of, and then that's another part of it. If you have consensus, people will be willing to work together to make it work. But if you have voting, some people will say, well, this is happening, I don't agree with that, that is happening, and when you don't, I'm not helping. So only decide that, only do it. So you get that kind of standoffish behavior within an organization. Somebody was making a comment? No? All right. Um, so, and again, here you're talking about when you're being inclusive, you also have to be inclusive to the people who are stakeholders and shareholders. So those who share an interest as to those who will be affected by the change that you're talking about. So you have to also be involved, those who aren't directly inside your organization, but those who are affected by what you do, those external to your group or organization. So that should be one of the things that we pay attention to. And in fact, most organizations, whenever they do focus groups, they do focus groups with shareholders and stakeholders to find out how they feel about certain things. This is informal organizations and stuff like that. But a very simple way to do it is, just simply ask a question of somebody who's not necessarily in your group about how they feel about certain things that might affect them from what you're doing. So consider, for example, the stakeholders in this class in relation to the activities of each small team that we have who's going to teach a chapter coming up. Think about that. The decisions that you're making as those small little groups impact upon the other students in class because they are stakeholders in you getting your presentation done successfully. Think about that. I'm a shareholder because I I um I have a responsibility in what you're doing. You understand? But the other students are your stakeholders because they will impact upon it. And in both cases, you're going to stand on both sides of that paradigm as well. So think about it. Think about these things about involvement, inclusiveness, right? About stakeholders and the impact that or the concern we need to have for those people who are not directly connected to the group but who need to be included. So these are the types of stakeholder issues that you could come across. Those who are problematic, antagonistic, or feel they have low priority as opposed to supportive. So you want most of your supporters or shareholders, stakeholders and shareholders here. You don't want an antagonistic because they can create problems for you. Low priority is, they really don't care. And that's not important because you want them to care about whatever you're doing. If it falls here or falls here, it's really, really problematic. Or because you have to get some reaction out of it, or else people will not respond to the change that you're doing. If you find mostly people falling into one of those areas, you need to maybe work on it to be able to get it going. All right. So this model again comes from the textbook as well. So all of these things come from there. All right. Empowerment. Empowerment has to do with the other part of it. The relational leadership model empowers the people in the organization. And there are two dimensions there, the sense of self-empowerment and the environmental conditions that you set up for empowerment to take place. So the two aspects for it. So it means the first one here is that you make people want to get involved and want to do things. That is the aspect of personal empowerment, that you are not setting up a situation, but you're setting up the environment in which they are willing to take on and become involved in what you're doing and how you're dealing with things. The environment is also one where it's non-judgmental, that you are setting up a situation, a climate in which people will be expected that if they make errors or they fail at doing, they're not going to get knocked down and punished for it. So you don't want that type of situation. You want empowerment to be a rewarding experience. So you want people, one, willing to take responsibility, and two, you want the environment to encourage it to continue. But if it is not an empowering environment, it's going to then prevent other people from wanting to become involved in making decisions and taking responsibility. That's actually a serious part. So in order to understand this a little better, they asked us to look at the root of empowerment, which is power. We have to understand power a little bit better. So power is about well, they have to start by defining power. Of course, power is defined differently in different contexts. So has to be doing something about having the ability to do something, the authority and ability to do it. And that is something that when you're dealing with empowerment, you have to give the person that you're empowering the authority to do something as well as the responsibility. Now, there is some dynamics that take place here. So this is one of the reasons why we have to kind of look at what power is. Power is traditionally looked at as zero sum, meaning that it's all or none. You have power or you don't have power. That's basically it. And that conventional approach can't work. In fact, there are different types of power that structures that exist. So you have the power dynamic that runs from power over, that's the traditional autocratic system. Power with, that is, so think about you guys who are presenting chapters. You all have collaborative power. I have given you the power to collaborate to present something, and then you have collegial power, because each individual group is collectively going to work alongside to present the chapters. So it's sharing of power in relation to all of the concepts that we're going to be looking at here. This is an example of how that works. All right, so how we look at power is something that is going to be important to look at, because positional power, so the different forms of power that you have to look at. Positional power, so and they come from what we call the sources of power. And when you have power, you have to be careful how you use it, because if you abuse your power, it's going to have is going to have an impact that could be negative to the organization. So there are these five sources of power: expert power, referent power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power. So you have to look at each one. Expert power is the power of information or knowledge. So you're the expert, you know a lot, and people look upon you as being an expert in the field, and therefore you will have you'll be assigned by individuals with the expert power because you have that knowledge. Referent power has to do with your strength of individuality and personality. So you might think of somebody in your organization who's revered by other members of the staff because of maybe the senior, they've been there so long and they've understood everything, or they give off this guru type activity. I mean, think about it as the guru in your organization, or the like, kind of somebody who you can who's open and people can go to and ask for advice and get help. They may not have any formal structural power, or what is called legitimate power, but they are given that power because other people look upon them in that context of having the respect of the population of employees or workers who may have that kind of thinking. Hey, you want to do something, go and check this person out, that kind of stuff. Of course, well, legitimate power is the power that's assigned to somebody by an organization. That's their formal rule. So even in a social organization, when you get elected into power positions like treasurer or president, that kind of stuff, you get that formal power. But when you have formal power, you have to be careful how you exercise it, because it it can fall apart very, very quickly. All right. Then of course you have another source of power, cohesive power, cohesive power. That's power in which you derive from the ability to impose or threaten sanctions or punishments by either giving or receiving benefits or rewards, or refusing the rewards. So it's punitive action, coercive, is basically forcing you to follow the rules, or to follow them. So that again is a dangerous type of power to utilize. And in fact, this type of leadership model looks at um, using more non-cohesive methods of power and enforcing a power. So that is not one that we want to utilize a lot. And then of course, those are the reward power. I think I missed that off. There it is. Reward power is the power that you have through almost like a transactional basis. You because you're the gatekeeper of the extrinsic rewards that you can give, like raises, plaques, special privileges, or praise or support. Though that reward power is also another source of how people have power over others. Now, there's something that you have to pay attention to, and that is we may give people power who don't really need it, or we give up our power without knowing it. Um, so you might not think of yourself as being an expert on a topic, but in fact you are. But we are so full of self-doubt that we really don't perceive ourselves as having that expert power. And that is something that you have to look at. Secondly, we might be giving people power based upon a perception that we have. And you want to pay attention to those behaviors that we have a tendency to do. So we may also create a situation where we we are giving people power who, because we perceive them to have a particular behavior with them. And if you understand what I mean, in relation to that. So we have to think about those things clearly when we're looking at them. All right, so this is what I was talking about in terms of understanding power. Don't give your power away and don't assume power exists in different contexts. So that's something that you want to pay attention to. So in empowering other people, you have to understand what happens when you are dealing with power, because power is something that you have to be careful with, because most leaders believe that power is something that they must control. But the reality of this model is asking you need to give up control, and you must give power to people to be able to get the organization to move better. So sharing power is a very important element of the overall process that this model is talking to, which is why empowerment is important. Now, lots of leaders have problems with this, and because they're unwilling to share power, because the control of power is seen as being the requirements of leadership. But this model says you need to give away your power, and it's important to realize that giving power grants more power, because and that's what this model is saying. Whereas in the old paradigm they would say, in order to maintain your power you must keep it. But this model is saying, no. For you to get more power, you have to give more power to the people. Because in empowering others, it strengthens your position. Just think about it from that sense. If you give legitimate authority to other people to do things that you know that they're capable of doing, that will give them, that will give you more power overall. So you have to give power to get more. That's basically what this is trying to say to you. And you have to understand the power dynamics that is taking place. And that is something that you have to look at, because having all that power for yourself is dangerous. You have to give that power over for your organization to be able to act. You can't be in a situation where only you're making decisions. That will hamper our organization knowing. If you've centered all the decision making to yourself, which means you reserve the power to make decisions to one individual or one group of individuals, then you weaken the organization in terms of that. And that's an interesting thing. By concentrating power in one area, it makes the organization top heavy, and that therefore you're not going to benefit from the advice and the skills that other people in the organization have. That's a critical thing that you want to think about. All right. One other aspect of holding power is that power has responsibility. Those who have power, even if you give power over, it means that you're also giving responsibility. But the person who's ultimately responsible, especially like if you start to delegate responsibility, even though you delegated responsibility to somebody else, it does not make them accountable. It's still, you still maintain that accountability by itself. All right. So self-empowerment is another aspect of this, in that you have to be able to empower others to recognize that they have a contribution to make. Um, and you also have to empower yourself. So as a follower, you also need to understand that you have the capacity to develop your own sense of self-power. Now, so it's kind of shifted from the leader's responsibility to now followers' responsibility. So leaders have power inherent in them because they're leaders. And they can start to assign power to other people by sharing that power with the participants. But participants have to understand that they can also do self-empowerment exercises as well. So self-empowerment meaning, to, if you don't have the expert skills, then go and acquire it by yourself and do that. It is a good thing if your organization encourages it by sending you on training, but you have to understand that you can do things to create your own power, to self-empowerment. And this is some of the aspects that you want to look at. And you also want to shape your organization in such a way that it helps other people to acquire the kind of power that we're looking at. So these are some self-empowerment exercises that you can get in: educating, practicing and leading, creating the structure, um, to be able, well, structuring, creating structure and factors such as arranging a day, bringing people to the table, changing policy, kind of putting things in place to be able to help develop that power, self-empowerment, providing resources for yourself and others to be able to do it, mentoring those. So that's another technique that a leader can do it. Mentoring those who are junior in an organization to be able to bring them in and teach them how to do it, and then of course taking it on and empowering it by actually doing it. So take on responsibility as an individual in the organization. And far too many of us tend to do that hands-off approach. Why? Because we're afraid of more work, especially when it comes to work. And that's something I've always learned about. Good work is bring more work. That's the only reward of good work. And of course, in most organizations, you have to value that empowerment. So when employees do work, or members of your organization do work through self-empowerment, you have to recognize it. And that recognition is going to be critical, because it actually factors on this area here. Empowerment places people at the central focus of what is happening in an organization. It means that if you are empowered to act, then it's what happens in the organization is going to matter to you. And empowerment make things matter. If you aren't part of, or you don't feel like you're part of the overall structure and organization, it means that you're going to be marginalized. So empowerment is one of the methods that you can utilize to make people feel that it matters, as opposed to being marginalized. And that's an important thing, because you need to be able to pull people into the context of your organization so that it matters to everybody. And that's a critical thing that you have to be paying attention. You have to be wary of marginalization in your organization, especially when new people come in, or if people who are significantly different to the people that you already have in your organization come in. Think about that as, like, for instance, your first group meetings. So you have to be trying to make sure that you're inclusive and making sure that everybody matters. And part of that is by trying to create an environment that makes them feel like that. So of course, we talked about empowering environments already, that you have to set up a situation in your organization or your group that allows for the environment to encourage empowerment. And one of the main things is learning, that we have to be able to learn, and we have to be able to accept that when learning takes place, errors will take place. In fact, in all learning environments, it is important to understand that in order to bring people into the fold, you have to expect that people can make mistakes and that things can go wrong, and that's important to follow. All right. So, in essence, therefore, that empowering environments are really learning organizations, and they are open, they're honest, they include everybody, but they also include everybody to learn together as well. All right. So those are that's the gist of the empowering environment that you want to make. That the environment, and it supports everybody to get things done. We accept that when we do things, we may fail, but that failure doesn't mean it's the end of the important thing. And of course, it gives over power, but holds responsibility, and you don't do it in such a way where you are manipulating people. That's an important element that you want to pay attention to, because sometimes you could get empowered and get set up, and that's a like a really cynical leader will say, okay, you want to do this here, do it. And then when you give it over to them, you don't give them the resources, or you set them up in such a way that they end up failing on it. And then you say, see, this is why you need to get fired, or this is why they ridicule you, and that kind of stuff. You want to be careful with that. Empowering environments are not ones that will make people feel manipulated. See it here? Unprepared, resentful, or victimized. You want to create an environment where people are going to feel like it matters that what they do, they did. All right. So those are the things that you want to do: the creation of empowering environment. So then we come to the fact that the relational leadership is ethical and moral, and this model is going to speak to this in so much detail that they even go back by defining what is ethics and trying to get you to understand what it means to be ethics is the origin of the word itself. The idea that they're talking about here is that ethical standards of leaders in this model need to be really high, and that they want you to pay attention to it, because what you do exhibits more of what your ethical values are than what you say. And it means that your actions need to reinforce the ethical values that you hold. All right. So they spend a lot of time trying to define what is ethics and ethical standards, and that type of stuff. And they sort of try to look at the reason why you need to know your own ethical values is because, as this case here, they talk about it being providing a true north, meaning a true north would be like a compass. If you have particular ingrained values that if something goes wrong, you know what is right and wrong. You have an indicator of where right and wrong is when you're trying to make changes and decisions. So you're not guessing at things. Or your values will be aligned in such a way that you know what people would say is right or wrong. And the problem here is also the definition of right and wrong has changed over time. So you want to also pay attention to the code of ethics that people would adhere to as it has molded or changed over time. And that's where part of the ethical and moral leadership has been impacted upon. Because some of the things that we may look at as being ethical and moral today in past frames, no way you could have done things like that. Similarly, things that we used to do in the past are no longer relative or important at this point in time. So, but the whole idea is that being moral comes from our personal sense of what is good and right, um, and what
So,
we define as the yeah.
uh, I want
Go
to
ahead.
ask a question.
Go
I
ahead.
actually need to leave. The for next week, the
Next
in
group is
short,
presenting.
yes. What we're going to be doing is basically teaching that chapter. Yes.
Yeah, but I'm trying to teach you
Oh,
2 chapters in one night, so that's why we taking
mhm,
so long. I
mhm.
realize it's 9 o'clock already.
Okay, so
Yeah,
we're
but
just
that's what you're going to be doing.
teaching.
Uh,
Hmm.
you're going to be teaching the content from the chapter in a manner that you can get people to engage in your discussions. But one thing that you want to do is to make sure that you don't leave anything out, but you pull the key things. So a lot of the examples that they give, you can cut out those things, but you need to
Right.
be pulling the key concepts and ideas as you move forward. All right,
Okay.
that, that makes sense to other people. I don't, and again, I don't expect perfection, but what I do expect is I expect that you will make a great attempt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So let me just quickly run through this. Maybe Mikkel might have to leave, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Finish it up. Um, Counseling. So again, the ethical part of this model is going to be critical. It plays a very large role in behavior. And what I speak about here is that this model is actually supposed to be values driven as opposed to the other position where it's what's the word that they use here? So I can find it here. Um, so in any case, what they're trying to say is that the leaders need to exhibit strong moral and ethical values in the face of uh, so you have to be consistent with it. You can't have one value now and then 2 weeks or a year later you change your values. You have to be consistent with your value system. It can't be wishy-washy over time frame. I mean, yes, you're gonna have some change that might take place over time, because what society would have looked upon as being an ethical value or moral value 10 years ago may not hold constant now. So those are things you need to pay attention to. But what you're looking for is some sort of strength in all of the nonsense that's around you. So the model here is going to be value driven as opposed to the other form that they always look at, which is values driven or value dependent. So it is one or the other. So there's a relationship between moral values that you have and type of leadership you have, or is it that your leadership has to be driven by that? So the idea is this is values driven. Values are going to drive your relational leadership model across the board. Try and read up on that aspect of it because the ethics is a huge part. In fact, there are two chapters, one from the DAF, one from the the exploring leadership that two groups will be presenting on from the ethical values. That's BUSI. And your midterm activity is going to center around ethical values and ethical decision making. So you want to pay attention to this area as well. All right. So the whole thing has to do with a commitment towards being, yes. Okay. Hi. All right. So kind of running to the end here. All right, so these are some questions here that leaders need to ask about themselves to be able to understand who they are. And this has to do with leading by example. So this is important because the model requires that you lead by example, and that's something that they always talk about. You have to walk the walk. You just can't talk it. You have to walk the walk. You have to lead by example across it. So the model speaks to that as well, especially like this quotation here. What you what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say. And that's where your example speaks more power or speaks more to who you are as an individual, as a leader, than anything else. You can say whatever you want, but what you do is what really speaks to who you are as an individual, both from your moralistic values to your what you truly believe. All right. So those are things that you want to pay attention to when you're going to look at that. So and it's straightforward. Leading by example is straightforward. You really tell who you are, what kind of person you are, and what kind of leader you're going to be in relation to that. So the last element here that we're looking at is about leadership being about a process, and understand what a point of a process is, that a process allows us to go through things and try and reproduce that outcome each time. So the relational leadership model is based upon a process that allows us to repeat and get similar results every time we try to get it done. It's a process that also means that we go through periods of discovery, rediscovery, and rebirth all the time. We have to be doing that. And that means that we have to be able to understand and put in place the process that allows that transition of ideas to go through. All right. So the idea is very simple, that you have part of the process revolves around us trying to think about things. So leadership is cerebral in nature because we have to really be thinking and reflecting upon what we've been doing in order to try and get that process, get it right. Because as I said before, it's more of a spiral than a circle. Every time we make go through a process, it should bring us to a greater sense of awareness, so that the next time we do it, we are more aware. So our field of awareness and perception is widened. So every time we make that circle, we're widening out the next time. That's what reflection is going to do. Now, some things we will cut away, but other things we would add. So that's the things that we need to do. All right. Um, so there are various aspects that they talk about in terms of making the process, include collaboration, include reflection, feedback, civil confrontation. You have to, in fact, deal with conflict. You have to be able to build community, and of course, you have to make meaning. All right. So meaning making. So you basically, your participants and yourself have to want to be involved because it means something to them. All right. Um, the whole process has to also be reflective. You need to collaborate on it. And when you're reflecting, you have to reflect in utilizing process as well. So reflection is a big part of it. As we said, cooperation and collaboration. There's a difference between cooperation and collaboration. Collaboration is working together. Cooperation is allowing each other to work. So those are things that we have to be aware of and avoid too much high competition, because competition is a different skill for different activities, not for this. But a lot of organizations tend to use competition to say it promotes progress, but in organizations, competition is destructive, especially organizations that have a focus and a goal that they're trying to achieve. If we are all trying to compete the same, we will tend to crab in a barrel syndrome. I have to get there before you, so I have to beat down everybody else. So that's the negative impact of competition. Whereas collaboration and cooperation is to help us collectively get to that point. All right. So with that, we come to the importance here. You realize that collaboration, meaning making. And when we say meaning making, we're talking about making sure that whatever is happening in the organization and in the process matters to us. Because if it doesn't matter, it will not be something that we will take seriously. So they said it basically has there's a cognitive element and an emotional element. So that the ideas and concepts is made up of part of that, and then there's the emotional component. So you have an emotional commitment to the process that you've been dealing with, and that's an important element because it's an idea that you have, and you want people to commit to it from an emotional perspective. All right, so meaning making is critical for us to care about the process that we've created for this leadership model, so that we understand that the model requires effort and therefore requires constant work. If we don't make it matter to people, then we're not going to get people, to ourselves as well as other individuals, to commit meaningfully to it. So this is the situation of making meaning. You get data, process it into information. That information is made into knowledge. That knowledge leads to understanding. That understanding leads to wisdom. And then we start back again with thoughts and action, and it affects our thoughts and action. Now, it may be seen as a flow, but it's actually the same thing that I've been talking about with you guys. It's going to feed us into another circle, of data gathering, but this time we're going to be able to utilize that data gathering process by gathering more information on a wider perspective. That's going to be important. All right. So making meaning is a process of arranging our understanding of experiences so that we can now, open up and start to develop our thinking process. And it helps us to not only understand the organization, but it's also going to involve us understanding ourselves better and how we behave in certain situations as well. All right. So again, making it matter or meaning making is a very important aspect of the process. As I said before, without it, you will not care. And if you don't care, then there's no way that you're going to be able to get people involved, because that's the whole process that you're trying to do. So, and they spend a fair amount of time on meaning. And here also the next part of it, or very critical part of it, is reflection and contemplation. You have to reflect, and the methods that you use for reflection are important, because reflection and contemplation means that you pay attention to what you've done, either good or bad, and reflect upon it so that it can impact upon how we can improve things in the future. And that's a part of reflection that helps us to understand better what we've done in the past and then come back again. So one of the things I like to do is to try and reflect on my work from previous semester to this semester. But one of the problems that we've been constantly facing is the transition from one semester to another has been so rapid that it doesn't give us sufficient time to really go through the exercise of reflection and contemplation, especially not as a group. We might be able to do some reflection individually, but it works better if you reflect on the entire process of how you've done something in a group setting. But that's harder to do because it means you have to spend time coordinating how you're going to do your reflection. And which is why you have a host of questions here. What is happening? Why is it happening? What does it mean? What does it mean for me? What can I learn from it? Those are the kind of questions you want to do. So in order to bring a group of people through a reflection exercise, back in the day, in the 90s in particular, most organizations will go off on a retreat. I don't know if any of you all were part of retreats. And in doing those retreats, they'll go through this whole reflection exercise. And they would get guest speakers to come and help to think about things and try and reconceptualize things and then do a whole set of work on terms of team building and all this kind of stuff. So coming out of the 90s and into the early 2000s, this was part of the things but I've noticed that a lot of organizations kind of paused on this now. But this is a critical element to any organization developing and revising where they are in terms of an entity. So there's a number of slides here that speak to this whole reflection process and paying attention to how we go about reflecting. I'm getting an idea that somebody wants to say something. Anyway, so you realize that there's a lot of things about reflection and contemplation. Another thing is ruminate. It's another word you want to do. So that kind of brings us to the end. So again, you end at the beginning, because when you do reflection and contemplation, you start the process over. And every time you do that reflection, the idea is that you gain more insight, knowledge, and perception. And the next time you do your process, it's a wider circle. That's why I say it's not a circle so much as it is a spiral. And again, I'm sorry, but again, this model is so detailed and there's so many aspects to it. Of course, it ended up being a long presentation. So I hope you all understand that even though this is an approach we're looking at, it's not an approach that I'm going to say you have to agree with, but you have to look at it and extract from it what you think is going to be relevant for you and relevant for your organizations, and what you think you can adapt into your thinking. All right, and as I said, there's no need for you to learn this. You can take these slides, the text, everything, and look at it on your own speed. There's no aspect of exams or quizzes involved with this, as somebody talked about before. So it's a model that we hope will be able to help you develop your own thinking about your leadership capacity and your leadership philosophy. So those are the things that we would like you to be paying attention to. All right. That kind of brings us to the end of the chapter. Anybody has any particular questions they would like to ask about it? I know it's 9:15, so we're a bit over time. 9:17.
So I just have one question. When we presenting next week,
Uh-huh.
would it be required that we have to put it on PowerPoint, or we could just
Speak about it. It
yeah?
might be a good idea for you to have something for people to focus on.
Okay.
Because either that or you have to project, because we'll need something to focus on, which is one of the reasons why you'd see that I would have a PowerPoint and I'd have my image up so that you can actually see me and I'm not just, lying down in the background and talking off my head. So,
Yeah.
again, for you to be able, for anybody who's participating in our presentation, having something to focus on is important. So images, words, phrases, pictures, those kind of things are important for us to have something that we can look at. Because one of the problems that comes up with online presentations is the small delay between what you do physically and what you see coming back on the screen, which is one of the reasons why I don't have a problem with you all turning off your monitors.
Okay.
But it does make, there was it's called Zoom fatigue. I don't know if anybody heard about that yet. If you did some reading, check it out. Um, it's actually a physiological issue that comes up when you're doing online classes that you have to pay attention to. So it can wipe you out if you're not familiar with it. So one of the things you also have to remember is not to be looking at your image on the screen, but you want to be paying attention to the camera up here, that piece. If you don't
Okay.
look at the camera, it looks like if I'm looking down at the screen here now, I'm looking at my image here, but it's so down, but it looks like I'm looking away from you. So you have to remember to look at the camera itself. So the participant who's looking at the presentation feels as if you are looking at them. But it's a little difficult. It takes some practice to do it. And also means that you're not going to be as tired as you were before. All right?
Okay. And the
All right,
limit
then.
to the
Yeah.
pages, it could be any limit, right?
Well, I'm going to ask you all to try and keep your presentations down to about an hour piece. Literally, I presented 2 chapters here, and it took me a little more than 3 hours. So we have to look at that, see how it goes. All right.
Okay.
Anybody has any other questions they want to ask about? Wait, I'm seeing some chats here now. Yes, somebody copied the Costa's vision into the chat. I don't know if you all saw that. To be a student-centered, dynamic, and innovative world-class multi-campus college promoting excellence in teaching and learning, serving diverse communities and producing lifelong learners who can compete globally. All right, so Renee had to leave, that's no problem. Shaim had to leave as well. That's okay, I understand. The session went much longer than I think. Anybody found the tagline? The transforming tagline? I'm gonna stop presenting now.
It's not transforming lives.
Transforming
Something.
lives, yeah, but there's a longer version to it.
Okay.
Transforming lives, transforming students,
And transforming something else.
transforming
But
the nation one student at a time.
yeah.
It's a little tagline. It's a little longer, but we used to have these badges that we had with the college logo. We used to call it the Transformer badge. It was something. It was funny, but it was important because it created a sense of belonging, and it gave you a focal point of leadership. Kind of disbanded some of those things. And in disbanding it, though, one of the problems was nothing was ever put in to replace it. So kind of like law sheep a little bit sometimes. All right.
So why was it disbanded?
Sorry.
Why was it disbanded?
Um, because it was reflective of that particular leader's position, and I think the new president that came in wanted to create their own leadership model. So, and that happens in organizations. And when you have a change in leadership, it changes the focus of the organization, and there's a different leadership style that comes in to play, and that's something that you have to deal with because if you work with an organization long enough and you've transitioned from through a number of leaders, the way in which they go about doing things is going to be slightly different. It can be a little problematic for the individuals who participate in the organization, but it's part and parcel of how leadership works. When a new individual comes in, they bring in their own personal beliefs and value systems, and that's what they're going to be doing. You have to deal with that issue as well. All right, that makes sense, Alex?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, anybody else wanted to ask a question before we call it Jorge for the evening? Kenroy?
No, sir, nothing from me, sir. I good. I real good.
All right, guys. So I really want to thank you for bearing with me for so long, but I really did want to get the two chapters covered. It would have been nice to have done one last week and then this week, but we didn't have two scheduled sessions. But as I'm hoping you can realize, or you realize why there's so many slides. It's because the model is so detailed and the quantity of information. Now, I don't expect that your presentations will be as detailed, but I'm looking for you to at least touch the main concepts of each one. That's one of the reasons why I paid attention to making sure that this was a highly detailed presentation. All right. Okay, guys. So good night, and thank you for bearing with me.
Good night.
I hope everybody.
Good night.
Okay, good night.
If you have any questions, otherwise you can also post them in the chat, and I can deal with it there as well. All right, guys. Good night, and thanks for being here again.
All right.
All right.
Good night.
Good night,
All right,
sir.
Bye. I'll post the recording later on when it finishes processing.
Okay, sir.
Okay,
All right,
sir.
guys. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.